Well, here we finally are. Better late than never. Good day, hello, morning, afternoon, and evening, my dear listeners, and welcome to my in-depth review of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. A video series that has taken a bloody long time to come out, but nevertheless we are here at last. I apologize for my absence in these last few months. Every moment of my time for this channel has been basically dedicated to creating this series. As I'm sure you can assume, in this series I will be attempting to break down and evaluate, in detail to the best of my ability, the plot of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, the final chapter in the Disney-titled Skywalker Saga, which consists of all 9 mainline films. I will be covering the film in terms of its writing, how it stands on its own, how it works as a conclusion to the saga, and as a continuation to the previous films of this trilogy and the originals and prequels. I will be talking about the storyline, the characters, the lore, direction, production, and the smaller details. Basically a lot of stuff, and there is plenty to get through, and I will be going through the entire film chronologically, point by point, scene by scene. I can't wait to get started. So, for those of you who are listening, I want to thank you for joining me, and for your patience. It's been quite some time since I posted any content. I have taken my time with this series as I want it to be the best it can possibly be, and honestly, you deserve it. On screen right now you can see a breakdown of the structure to this series. I have separated it into the 3 acts of the film plus an introduction and a conclusion. If you so desire, you can jump to any section you wish using the links provided. However, if this is your first time watching, then I would encourage you to stick with me from the beginning. Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker opened to, it's safe to say, a divided fan base that over time, through argumentation with each other, has fallen into a melancholy state. Plenty of people have openly criticized it already for many things. Some who defended the previous 2 films heavily now seem to have turned heel and have plenty to say against the trilogy as a whole, while we still wait for many other people's perspectives to be released. Naturally, there are people out there who still heavily praise this film, and it remains unclear as to why, outside of simple descriptors for things being perfect or fantastic. But now, well, it's time for my perspective. Though I suppose it would be beneficial to explain my outlook on media as a product. My channel is relatively new and I assume not many people will know exactly where I stand in terms of the whole judgment of art thing. I am one of those people who stands by the claim that art can be judged objectively for its quality while simultaneously having subjective results on its audience, as in different from person to person. Be it films or TV or video games or music, there is a scale to be used in order to judge them so we as a collective can understand what makes them high or low in terms of quality. What were the techniques used in that media to achieve the agreed upon result, and how other media can improve for the future based on those examples. You know, how progress works. When it comes to my criticism on movies, the passion and therefore intention behind my work is not meant to be malicious, nor is it an attempt to prove my opinion is the right one. The intention is to establish that scale, one we can all use. The conclusion someone comes to on how much they like or dislike a piece of media once it's been subjected to that scale is not something I or anyone else can control, nor do I have a desire to. Saying you like a product such as a film and your feelings on that product are absolute is fine. Your emotions are your own. But when you claim that product to be of high quality when it can be proven otherwise, that would make you wrong, regardless of whether you liked the craft. As far as I'm concerned, your feelings towards a film and your claims about its quality are 2 entirely different conversations, and neither is inherently more valuable, just different depending on the context of that conversation. A personal example I could give you is that I love both The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit trilogies equally, though I'm more than prepared to admit one trilogy is far superior in terms of writing quality to the other. I know the Hobbit films are badly written in many places. I know which one of these is the superior craft in storytelling, but I cannot separate my feelings from The Hobbit all the same. There are many moments in each film that elicit a strong emotional response from me. I would honestly consider The Hobbit to be my guilty pleasure. Modern conversation tends to conflate these topics. Your feelings on media you consume can't be proven wrong, of course, but that doesn't extend to your opinions on the media being good, as subjective feelings are not a measurable metric. For media, like films, the measurable metrics would be the direction, the writing, the production, the acting, the set design. We cannot get anywhere in conversation if we cannot agree that these things can be done well or not. When it comes to The Rise of Skywalker, I could sit down and talk about the parts I personally enjoyed and their effect on me and why. However, that is a different conversation to what this video is supposed to be, which is primarily a critique of its writing quality among other things. Now, if this sounds like something that is not for you, you are absolutely at your free will to close off. I have no qualms with that. But I do extend the invite to you to give this series a shot all the same. Meanwhile, those listening who are interested in this type of conversation, I hope this video finds you well. As a newcomer to this type of in-depth, long-form content, I really want to bring as much new stuff as I can to the table while being as informative as possible. This is easily my longest piece of work yet, so please feel free to pause when comfortable and return whenever you wish. I will be waiting. Now, I have given this my best shot and a considerable amount of time. Nevertheless, do be prepared, as I might very well slip up here or there or misunderstand information, and hopefully those listening will be able to correct me. I thoroughly anticipate the discussions we might have. I'm going to try and keep the visuals as fresh as I can, but because this is a newly released film, that is going to be difficult, as Disney have put restrictions on what can and cannot be shown. So for the sake of not having this critique video taken down, I am relegated to mostly still images, or the movie in small clips. I will try and shake things up as best I can with other footage. So without further ado, let's jump into the introduction section. Before we get started with the actual film, I would like to give a brief summary of where it sits in the universe. The Last Jedi ended with our heroes fleeing the First Order on one small ship, the Millennium Falcon. No one has chosen to stand by the Resistance in their hour of need, which means our good guy faction is the weakest it has ever been. However, through contrived means, a story has apparently spread regarding Luke's heroic actions. Never mind the fact that the only people who saw Luke's actions were the First Order faction, and it would make no sense for them to spread rumors that would make them seem weak or incompetent. Either way, The Last Jedi made out that this would be of importance going forward. It will be interesting to see how that story has affected the galaxy's view of the First Order. Maybe they will see the faction as less formidable and fearsome. Kylo Ren now rules as supreme leader of the First Order, the scale and strength of said force remaining rather unclear considering what was presented in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. In terms of this film, we only properly see one First Order class Star Destroyer again, Kylo Ren's flagship. So for the Resistance, we have a confirmed small amount of members left, nearly no resources, and only one confirmed ship. The members of the Resistance are Leia, the leader, potentially the last means of reaching out to her son. Her authority is respected, but not enough to encourage other factions to come out of hiding to fight. She also has some strange, unclear force capabilities that only appear when the plot requires, but we as the audience are left to assume she has gifts that we have not seen and she will potentially make use of. We have Poe, an ace pilot and courageous fighter, reduced down to a man who seemingly learned not to step out of line and to obey the orders as he is given. We have Finn, an ex-stormtrooper whose knowledge on the faction he used to serve remains unclear, though he could potentially know a great deal of useful information that, as far as we are aware, he hasn't yet revealed to the remaining Resistance, being only part of it for a day. This may include First Order tactics, troop movements, fleet strength, and bases of operation the Resistance could strike. We have Chewbacca, who is mostly just a co-pilot and heavy artillery and firefights, that is when he's not being the Porg's plaything. 3 droids of various abilities, one of which is a wealth of information that can most likely help the Resistance find bases to operate from, weapons and allies on its extensive memory banks. There are several remaining members and pilots whose ties to other planets, contacts and factions remain unclear, but most importantly, we have Rey, an extremely powerful, altruistic, kind and brave hero with great mechanical, piloting, leading and fighting skills with a gift in the Force we have never seen before, who can apparently take Kylo Ren down herself without the need for help. As for the First Order, the extent of their resources remains unclear, but are undoubtedly overwhelming considering their stranglehold on the galaxy. Kylo Ren is in charge, a maniacal, mildly unhinged character motivated by his desire to turn Rey to the dark side for some reason, and crush the remaining forces of the Resistance that remind him of his past. We have multiple generals and officers, including General Hux, whose reputation for being calm and ruthless has been somewhat spoiled. As far as we know, he has been neutered and no longer has the nerve to challenge Kylo on anything. Go. Apparently, a little over a year has passed between The Last Jedi and the Rise of Skywalker, though this isn't something specified by the film ever, at least not from what I've seen on my repeat viewings. All we know is the Resistance are still around and are hidden from their enemy, despite lightspeed tracking and decloaking scans being abilities for the First Order. It is also unclear on just what front has the Resistance been battling. We receive no explanation for what kind of fights we have missed. How did they escape the remainder of Snoke's fleet at the end of TLJ, since apparently lightspeed tracking is possible on any Star Destroyer, and at least some of those ships survived? Have there been further conflicts? Small victories for either side? Or have the Resistance just been hiding this entire time? Have they amassed new forces? Has Leia contacted remaining allies? Again, let's hope we find out. So let us begin. I hope you are primed, folks. Grab a drink of your choice, because we are kicking things off with the title crawl, which says... The dead speak.
This is where the fun begins.
The galaxy has heard a mysterious broadcast, a threat of revenge in the sinister voice of the late Emperor Palpatine. And with that, I have some issues. As many know from watching the film or seeing the leaks, Darth Sidious, aka the Emperor, is back from the dead, and like many people, I myself asked immediately how and why. That question and more will not be answered by the film. We will get to that, but for now, let's talk about the relevant issue that comes up from this first sentence. If you are unaware of this development in the story, you might assume this is a trick of some kind, a voice recording of his, or that it is a plot point used to misdirect the audience. What we know from the third sentence in the crawl is that this is not the work of Kylo Ren or the First Order, but regardless of that, and whether you even know who the Emperor is from the original trilogy, the question remains, why was this broadcast made? Why now? And why to the whole galaxy? This acts as the catalyst for the film. All the character actions are triggered because of this broadcast. We never hear this broadcast in the film, by the way. At no point does the film tell us what the broadcast says, we just know he made one. In fact, the only way to have heard what this announcement actually was to go take part in a special event in a Battle Royale game called Fortnite. I'm not kidding. For those of you who might be curious, here is that broadcast.
At last the work of generations is complete. The great error is corrected. The day of victory is at hand. The day of revenge. The day of the Sith.
Firstly, haha, voice plays Fortnite. But more importantly, this is information that is omitted from the film, and it is the key reason as to why the events of this film take place. It's something you wouldn't know if you didn't play the game, so let's discuss why keeping information to your story in outside sources such as Easter eggs or unrelated video games is a bad way of supplying information to your audience. When creating a story, it is quite often agreed that the narrative you are telling should stand on its own. It does not require support from outside its medium. Having to go away and look at third-party content, comics, or behind-the-scenes documentaries to explain why your writing has transpired the way it has is not a streamlined experience. Case in point would be what Halo 5 did. They expected you to read the books and buy the comics and listen to the podcasts and play Spartan Ops in Halo 4 to understand the story that was unraveling in this game. It's a very shady business move. You must consume more content than just the content of the game itself in order to appreciate the events unfolding. You either write the story in full and then cut out important pieces, or you were too lazy to write a cogent narrative yourself and so fell on the dependence of outside sources to explain the through line of events taking place. This is the same with Destiny and the vast proportion of its lore being explained in the Grimoire cards, requiring you to disrupt your viewing experience to do additional research into a story that the media itself was not prepared to bring you up to speed on. Another version of this, and an example, would be when more content was created after a terrible film was constructed, which lacked decent explanations for its events. In this case, Star Wars, and this one novel that was created to explain how Rey suddenly mastered the Force. Spoiler, she somehow force-downloaded Kylo's powers because they are a, quote, dyad. Force-downloaded. Like a USB stick, she just copies all of his abilities while they were connected through the Force and stored them in her head for convenient future use. You can be so lazy with your story, as it turns out someone else will just fill in the blanks for you, like an official version of a fan using headcanon to explain the gaps, making them no longer objective flaws. See, it was the Force, it wasn't sloppy writing. Does this make the issues in Star Wars, Destiny, or Halo 5 better? No. Take those outside sources away, and their world-building, characters, and storylines still fall apart. Whether or not the outside pieces are present, their stories still ultimately have the same level of quality. And the answers we are given are often so lame, or badly constructed themselves, they act as reasons to ask more questions than provide answers. In the case of this Fortnite example, this is 4 lines of dialogue that would have taken up to a minute of time to hear at most. Not exactly eating into the film's runtime. Surely the extra seconds wouldn't have hurt. It's unreasonable to expect people to have done the entire list of objectives in the video game just to understand what this broadcast contained. because it likely could have supplied additional information to help us understand the stakes, and to immerse the audience further into the jumpstart of this film. The fact that it doesn't is just more of the problem. We gain no satisfaction whether we heard this announcement or not, because it provides barely any more information than the film. We know the Emperor felt there was an error that needed correcting, and that it has now been corrected, meaning that at least he achieved something before making this ridiculous message. The past work of generations has been completed. We don't know what this could mean, but it is the implications that he had a plan all along, and that it has led to the Day of the Sith. Like I said, there is no reason as to why this information wasn't provided at the beginning of the film so everyone could at least be at the same level of knowledge going in. It's a dirty move to try and hide something potentially important to fans behind a game with pay-to-win mechanics as a means to make more money. Now, back to the story, of which we are still on the opening paragraph of the title crawl. I find myself asking, what was the benefit of announcing this to the galaxy, informing your enemies that you are in fact alive? Ultimately, everything in this film is a response to this one plot point, which leads many of us to ask, what was the plan here exactly? You have both the Resistance and the First Order now searching for you with the intention to destroy you, as they fear the challenge and power you may possess. None of the information given by the film, or outside information others may have been graced with, acts as an explanation as to why the Star Wars supervillain felt compelled to inform the galaxy of his continued existence. We've had big deal villains return from the dead before. Harry Potter's Lord Voldemort would be a prime example, but Voldemort doesn't announce his return to the world. Outside of his devotees and Harry, no one has evidence of his resurrection. The Death Eaters keep it a secret at their Lord's request, and everyone in Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic remains in denial for a long time, because of course they don't want to believe the Master of the Dark Arts has returned. It's simply the ramblings of a boy who is claimed to be the Chosen One, much to their chagrin. Voldemort was wise enough to keep his return very much under wraps. He knows not many will believe Harry, and he is able to lie low and scheme for the next 2 and a bit films. That approach makes sense. Revealing his resurrection immediately would result in the might of the wizarding world crashing down upon him before he is able to build up any of his forces or weaken his enemies from within. But here, if you wanted revenge on the galaxy, was announcing that necessary? Just do it. Take the galaxy by surprise with a swift strike. The First Order is no match for the forces you have somehow amassed, and the rest of the galaxy is apparently in fear of them. From a strategy standpoint, there is no benefit to revealing yourself and announcing your next move days before you make it. But yes, Palpatine has announced he is alive to the whole galaxy, and he plans to exact his revenge. Revenge on what exactly? The galaxy, that is once again controlled and living in fear of an imperialist force with a dark side user at its helm? Revenge on the rebellion, that has had its majority destroyed and its remaining forces scattered? Need I remind you, Palpatine, you were not defeated by the Jedi or the rebellion. You were defeated by your own apprentice because you could not see the conflict within him. And Darth Vader died, and his heir is already on the dark side, so there's no way to get revenge there either. This threat rings rather hollow when you think about it. There will be plenty more to criticize from this simple information drop alone, and we will do so as the film goes on. So, to quote a familiar voice, keep that in mind, because I'm not done with it yet. The title crawl continues. General Leia Organa dispatches secret agents to gather intelligence, while Rey, the last hope of the Jedi, trains for battle against the diabolical First Order. So we've established Leia is still in charge of some kind of faction, which I assume is still the Resistance. She's sending out agents to gather intel. Where is Leia getting this information from? Does she have allies this whole time? Does this mean that her forces have grown to some extent? This is somewhat concerning because when we last left off, the Resistance boiled down to some lucky C-list characters, our main trio, the marketing ploys, and an old lady on a rust bucket. The film will go on to show they have in fact gained more ships. A lot more. Not enough to tip the scales, but it's still a lot more than The Last Jedi heavily implied. I imagine this was done to soften the blow of their losses from the previous film, but this information as to where these new people and ships came from will not be provided, and that kind of carelessness for consistency will need to be kept track of. You can't tell, but I am winking right now. I tell you what, next time I do that, I will quite clearly say wink wink, okay? Good. Let's go on. Rey has been training, practicing for the fight against the First Order, which would imply between this time gap she has not been fighting, training solidly, which would be odd considering she is a keen asset for the Resistance. The question I would say that has more importance is, why is she still involved? What little motivation she had was squashed in The Last Jedi. So her persistence to stay in the fight is a strange one. Why is she training? What is motivating her to train to be a Jedi? Because she is the Jedi's last hope? Luke didn't exactly give Rey much of a pep talk or reason to care. In fact, I'm pretty sure Luke's lesson was that the Jedi needed to end. This is something that the Last Jedi enforced as a message to Rey, and it transpires later into the film that Luke was right about things not going the way Rey naively believes. If anything, her motivations to try and bring back a religion that, remember, she believed was a mere myth should be non-existent. She is forced to escape her home of many years at her behest, gets captured, imprisoned, and then watches her only friend be horrifically injured trying to protect her. Rey then spent a day with the Resistance before being chosen to meet Luke Skywalker, instead of anyone else of more relevance. Luke Skywalker she considered to be a myth. She is disappointed with what she finds, is betrayed by the man she thought she could redeem, and is told she has no place in this conflict. She watches the Resistance ultimately die, and then limps away with the rest of them, with no home, plan, safety, guidance, and the great Luke Skywalker is dead. Yet this set of experiences was enough to encourage her to fight and train over the course of a year? What cack? Contrast this to Luke's reasoning to fight in the rebellion and train as a Jedi. The Empire already committed to actions to get Luke into the fight. His aunt and uncle were killed, he learns his father was a Jedi, and has vital information on how to avenge his aunt and uncle and save the galaxy fall into his hands. These events, among others, ultimately inspired him to fight against the evil that had wronged him. He comes to believe in the cause that sympathizes with his feelings. He then loses his father figure, and so takes it upon himself to train in the ways of the Jedi out of respect for Obi-Wan and his father's memory. That motivation changes in Empire, and so between that and Return of the Jedi, he has personal stakes in trying to save his father from the dark side. To summarize, we still don't understand Rey's personal stakes in this fight. From her perspective, her only motivation was smashed to pieces by Kylo refusing to let her save him. The cause she has known for a brief amount of time is nearly dead, her reasoning to become a Jedi is snuffed out, and she has nothing to gain from discovering who her parents are. Yet she is somehow also the linchpin to saving the Jedi and defeating the First Order. We go on. Meanwhile, Supreme Leader Kylo Ren rages in search of the Phantom Emperor, determined to destroy any threat to his power. This part of the title crawl is mostly fine, though it is interesting to think he is desperately searching for the Emperor based on nothing aside from one transmission, and as far as he and the First Order are aware, it could just as likely be a trick from their enemies. I will go into further detail on this point soon, but the film later makes us understand the Emperor does indeed want to speak to Kylo Ren directly and get him to kill Rey, so I wonder why he doesn't send Kylo Ren a message directly. We later see in the film that he has a direct communication line to General Pryde. Why doesn't he have one with the Supreme Leader of the First Order? This would have been a much simpler way to reach Kylo that wouldn't require him to tear through several planets. Neither would Emperor Palpatine need to make a broadcast to the rest of the universe. Just something to think about. Kylo's drive, according to the title crawl, is to eliminate Palpatine. As alive, he provides a direct challenge. This is interesting to consider because we don't know if Kylo is even aware of the amount of resources the Emperor currently possesses. We don't either at this time. He could already be outmatched and not even know it. Yet as this film will show, he doesn't seem to have a great deal of forces to combat a Palpatine-level threat, despite also having an apparent stranglehold on a portion of the galaxy. Somehow. I ponder what Kylo's plan is once he actually locates the Phantom Emperor. But that's it for the title crawl, and that question will be shortly answered. This crawl is quite the sweltering mess when you pause the yellow text floating across the screen and stop to consider it with much thought. We have a brief dump of exposition saying the Emperor is just back, out of nowhere. No explanation as to how or why, nor any for his actions, nor any build up to this moment, along with specific information as to what he actually said being hidden from us in a cartoonish pay-to-win video game. The Resistance are still around, despite all odds of survival. The last of the Resistance consisted of 400 people across 4 ships, and were reduced down to 24 at best on one old freighter, yet here we are a year later and they apparently have bigger fish to fry. Kylo Ren remains in charge of the First Order, which makes sense, though we wonder just what his plan is to deal with the Emperor if it does indeed turn out he is alive somehow. The Emperor would not be foolish enough to go boasting his survival to the rest of the galaxy without having some kind of protection, and Kylo should be aware of this, yet apparently he is raging in search, implying he is hasty and aggressive in his attempts to uncover the Emperor's location. Watching this title crawl for the first time already had me concerned as to just where this film was going, but we don't get a great deal of time to stop and think about it before we are thrust into the conclusions of a battle, so it's safe to say the film doesn't want us to think too hard on what it's trying to set up. Sadly for this film, my ability to pause whenever and have a ramble is a wonderful power I possess for this series. So that concludes the film's title crawl, and by extension, this video's introduction section. We've only got the rest of the film to go, so I hope you're prepared. Let's get started. We jump into Act 1. After the title crawl, we are essentially dropped into the end of a battle. We see a planet that remains unnamed, though I've heard many people say it's Mustafar. How anyone aside from a massive Star Wars nerd was supposed to recognize this planet from this one shot alone is beyond me. People would have been forgiven for just believing this is generic red and white planet, especially since I don't recall trees being a thing on Mustafar. In fact, previously, the planet seemed rather barren of any organic life. But it is Mustafar, and the reasoning as to why it is Mustafar will be made clear far later into the film. But if you wanted people to know that, then just put the name on the establishment shot, like Rogue One did. You don't need to do this for every planet, just the locations that no one mentions by name in the story. For example, later into this film, Poe mentions a planet by name that they need to go to push the plot along, Kijimi. The next shot we see of their ship is them arriving at that location. We don't need the planet's name on screen because we are smart enough as an audience to realize the location they talked about is likely the location they are arriving at now. We were provided no story elements to suggest they needed to go somewhere else first, and their method on how to reach the planet is obvious. The film also didn't explain if there were any obstacles to be in their way, even if there should be. Back to the opening. A Resurgence-class Star Destroyer hangs nearby, and we have a couple of TIE fighters flying towards it. A small nitpick here, but where are these fighters flying from if the Star Destroyer is so close to the planet? Were they deployed from another ship that's off-screen? And if so, why is it parked so far away from the other one? I assume the ship closer to the planet has landed troops for an invasion, so what are these TIE fighters for? Ah well, cut to the planet, we have some slow-motion shots of Kylo Ren cutting down a group of mercenaries, or indigenous people, accompanied by his stormtroopers. We get some awkward close-up shots and some strange choreography, including Kylo Ren hunched over presenting his back to his attacker. I'm sure Shad would have a field day. Altogether, the slow motion and the close-up shots make this whole bit seem very cumbersome. I know the prequels are often ribbed for having fight choreography that seems very scripted, but try to spot the mistakes in any of those fights. Anyway, after Kylo and his forces are successful and have killed off the opposition, he discovers a strange artifact hidden within a stone box. This is one of the MacGuffins in the movie. This device is apparently required to show the way to the Emperor's location, and Kylo has found it, in a random stone box in the middle of a forest on some planet that is apparently Mustafar. It's not explained how Kylo knew this object was required to find Palpatine, how it works, or where to go to find it. He just knew where it was, shows up, and gets it. I also find myself asking, how long has it been since the Emperor released his intergalactic message? Was it somewhere at the beginning of this year gap, and Kylo has been searching this whole time? Or was it released yesterday and Kylo just knew what he needed and where to go in this short space of time? The film implies the latter. If he did already know its location and what the object was, then why doesn't he already have it? He apparently quite likes to collect objects of Sith importance, as he has the mask of Darth Vader just sitting in his quarters. You may also notice we have an entire other movie missing here. This film implied that both factions were on the hunt to discover if the transmission from Palpatine was true, and they were going to try and find out his location in their own respective ways. A race to Palpatine, if you will. This means we could have had a story where the two sides worked together on this objective out of necessity, only for one side to commit to actions that betray the other. This could have made for something narratively interesting in terms of morality, if it was our heroes who pull the fast one on Ren and the First Order, even if the setup is basically another who gets to this important person first. Yet we skip all of that to just Kylo has already found the MacGuffin he apparently needs and is now on his way. For those of you who don't know what I mean by MacGuffin, it's a writing term in fiction for an object, device, or event that is necessary to advance the plot and or the motivation of the characters, but it is relatively unimportant in itself, or it remains unexplained. The briefcase in Pulp Fiction is a prime example. This object that Kylo now has serves no other purpose than just being a sat-nav. It only has one purpose to the story, and outside of that, it doesn't act as a drive for anyone or anything outside of needing to get it. Welcome to the Rise of Skywalker, everyone. We have a neat transition to Kylo flying in his starfighter. He has the artifact in question hooked up to his ship in some way, and it's able to direct him through some kind of nebula to his final destination. Kylo just happens to know how this artifact functions, that it was necessary for him to reach the Emperor, and where he needed to go to uncover it, all based off no prior information given by this film. And yet he knew to come get this artifact instead of the one in the Death Star. I know I'm jumping ahead here, but it is fortunate that he knew where to get the artifact that was the easier of the two to find, and he was able to do so as quickly as he did. Again, this could be some Sith knowledge he already has, since these artifacts point to what is later explained as the Sith homeworld. It's entirely plausible Snoke knew of this knowledge and passed it on to his apprentice, but that would be me writing the film for JJ, and of course, if Kylo or Snoke already knew of this artifact, why didn't they already have possession of it? Writing the opening events of a story should not be this hard, nor should I be required to headcanon reasonings in for myself or play a shabby video game. Kylo navigates through the nebula thanks to this artifact, and then for some reason the film shows him jumping out of hyperspace, despite moments ago showing he was not travelling at light speed. Noah? As we can see from this shot, once he is through the nebula, there is a great deal of empty space all around it. I mean, duh, it's space. But wouldn't Kylo just have gone around? Why does the Sith MacGuffin insist on taking him through the nebula? Was this what makes Palpatine's location so hard to find? Here's a question. What if you tried to approach the planet from any other direction? Can you? Did you try, you clod? And so he's arrived at a strange planet shrouded in darkness and lightning. This is indeed the Emperor's location, and so he lands outside some large cuboid object. It's odd that Kylo would have elected to come alone to this strange planet he has never been to before, that apparently is the home to the most powerful darkside user to ever pose a threat to the known galaxy. Kylo didn't take his Star Destroyer here, when, as I mentioned before in the title crawl section, it's entirely possible the Emperor has an armada, or at least some kind of fighting force of his own. Kylo didn't think to bring any First Order might with him as a precaution, despite the idea the Emperor wants him dead being rather likely, based on his broadcast containing the word revenge. Kylo Ren approaches this strange cube structure and ignites his weapon. Perhaps he senses the power within and the dangers of this place, further supporting the idea that maybe he should have brought some backup. This place is constantly flashing with lightning, and I suppose it is meant to make the location seem scary or corrupted, though I found this to be rather distracting as an effect to constantly have shining in my eyes, and this is probably the reason the film contains a seizure warning, a rather unnecessary effect that you could remove or at least tone down and therefore prevent the risk of people's lives, but here we are. He takes an elevator down through this superstructure, and as he does so, the Emperor speaks to him, telling Kylo that Snoke had trained him well, to which Kylo responds with a threat that he will kill Palpatine just as he has killed Snoke. And Palpatine responds with the reveal that he made Snoke.
I made Snoke.
I'm sorry, what now? The simplest problem to this is that this is not a counter to what Kylo Ren said, unless of course Palpatine is implying that he always wanted Kylo to kill Snoke and Snoke was just expendable, but I'll get to that in a moment. But this brings up a whole mess of questions, and I hope you can stick with me through this. Snoke was made by Palpatine. We even, and I'm not kidding here, we even see some Snokes floating around in some kind of test tube. Are these failed creations, backups you haven't used? How can you make something as powerful as Snoke? How was he made? Is it genetic experiments? Clones? Did you just congeal him through the Force? But most of all, what does this mean for the trilogy as a whole? It means that Snoke was a puppet this whole time, created by Palpatine to, I guess, serve in his absence. Snoke created the First Order and corrupted Kylo Ren to the dark side is now recontextualized to Palpatine created the First Order and corrupted Kylo Ren to the dark side. So the First Order was Palpatine's force this whole time, being ruled by someone else, whether that someone knew it or not, while he lived in his secret planet. Therefore, Palpatine already has a grip on the galaxy through the First Order, though we never find out if Snoke was doing this for Palpatine or for himself. This is another of many throwaway lines from the film that answer the surface layer question, but also generate a whole collection of new ones. because if pondered over in more depth, they will begin to fall apart, which you can already tell is something I will be doing. Going back to it, what's the announcement about Revenge for? Palpatine already has a means of control, it just so happens that Kylo is at the head of it now and was unaware that through Snoke you had created this new empire. Does that mean that Kylo killing Snoke was intended or a mistake on your part, Palpatine? Was your plan always for Kylo to take the reins of the First Order and scrub Snoke out of the picture? This would be a strange plan if it turned out Snoke was in fact your servant and was aware that he was. You killed off your own immensely powerful, loyal minion just to put someone else in charge who, as the last two films have implied, is conflicted, unstable, and unaware of your existence while having no reason for loyalty towards you. He quite literally cut your eyes and ears in half, and he did so because he wanted the Jedi and the Sith to die, which is something you probably only half agree with. Now that I think about it, was Snoke even necessary to build up the First Order? Could you not have corrupted Kylo yourself? This film even shows you have loyal generals in the First Order serving you directly. This whole create Snoke step was just one extra level of complexity that this film shows was unnecessary. God, this is so messed up and it's just from one line. This line was thrown in to answer the fan question of where Snoke came from without stopping to consider the additional details of how this affects the stakes and backstory of the entire trilogy. It confuses or downright obliterates it, and we're barely 5 minutes into this film. And that's not to mention the fact you can just create a being so powerful he can connect people's minds through the Force Skype call with minimal effort. We see that you have more in test tubes, so can you make more than one Snoke? Why didn't you just replace the one that died? Let's go further. Can you make an army of Snoke? How insanely powerful would that be? That is, unless Snoke was simply a shell and a part of the Emperor inhabited that body the entire time, which... let's not get into that one just yet. And all of this was just to bring Kylo before you. Moving past that, Palpatine reveals that he has been the voice in Kylo's head this entire time, twisting him to the dark side through Snoke and the ancestry with Darth Vader.
I have been every voice you have ever heard inside your head.
This should be a world-shattering revelation to Kylo, that everything he carved out for himself was actually manipulation from another source using the voice of his grandfather to twist his mind into what he is now, yet he just shrugs it off. It's not explained how we hear the voice of Palpatine, Snoke, and Vader in this one moment either. I guess Palpatine is very good at impressions. Skipping over that, if you wanted to bring Kylo over to your side, why didn't you just contact him personally? Surely you have the means of doing so if it turns out you are the secret big bad behind the First Order this whole time. This turning Kylo to your side thing hinges entirely on him getting to you first, and it's convenient as hell that all the problems mentioned earlier about Kylo finding the artifact so quickly are brushed aside for this to just happen. This would be an example of where the story has shown its hand. It needed Kylo to get to the Emperor first, so we can have the next sequence of events happen, and so it skipped over the details of how Kylo located the device necessary to reach Palpatine, how he knew he needed it, and the film has kept the Resistance out of the picture so Kylo could do this all uninterrupted. But there were so many things that could have happened as a result of Palpatine's actions. What would have happened if someone else had gotten to you before Kylo? What if the Resistance had shown up first because of your message, or your defenses are currently buried under the ground and you are being sustained by some kind of giant machine? If the Resistance had found a way to your location first and bombed the hell out of you, then it's all over. What if the galaxy had banded together to agree to take you down and that all the infighting could wait until afterwards? Apparently, the First Order was merely a taster of what Palpatine has prepared, and he plans to give Kylo so much more, conflating how ridiculous it is that the Emperor waited until now to speak to Kylo when he already had control of the previous Supreme Leader. Naturally, being untrusting, Kylo tells Palpatine that he will die, not willing to listen to his temptations, and Palpatine responds that he has died before, and then he recites a line from the prequels that this film believes serves as a reason for why he is here.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities
Some consider to be unnatural.
And with that, the Emperor is revealed, and we have received all the explanation we will get as to how he survived being thrown into the reactor of the Death Star and exploded twice, which ultimately is summed up as, nah, it's fine. He implies from this sentence that he is in fact dead. The machine he is attached to is simply animating his body. That's not the problem here, though. I mean, it is. I'm just more curious as how there should even be a body to find after the explosion of the Death Star. He was at ground zero to the blast and therefore should have been evaporated. This makes Anakin's story pointless now. Why? Well, the prophecy always foretold that Anakin would bring the Force into balance and defeat the dark side. Anakin does indeed destroy the Sith by killing the Emperor and dying himself, but it turned out that that journey was for nothing. The prophecy was wrong. Anakin's sacrifice and Luke's journey were both in vain. This movie is so awful for doing this, so bloody awful. Just rethink for a moment what was actually achieved at the end of Return of the Jedi. The Empire wasn't destroyed, they resurrected as an almost identical faction. Luke didn't train the next generation of Jedi, he betrayed his character, his students, and then confined himself away to an island to let the Jedi die.
Go away!
Luke's effort to bring his father back to the light and Anakin's prophecy didn't save the galaxy and destroy the Sith, because Palpatine survived, and how was never explained. He just did. He just shows up out of nowhere because we need a big evil Sith guy to play the villain of a Star Wars film, and Kylo just simply won't do. Shows how much Disney believe in their own creations. The trilogy hasn't established a precedent for this kind of thing, not even the tiniest amount of foreshadowing. The voices in Kylo's head and Snoke are not foreshadowing for the return of the Emperor. A more reasonable and likely answer was that it was decided the Emperor would return, and the writers slotted him in haphazardly, tying in any plot threads around this reveal in order for it to feel like it works. The reintroduction of the Emperor might be the worst writing decision I have ever seen. It does so much damage to both the original and sequel trilogy, and it ruins the prequel's prophecies, and it takes away the emotional impact people can have to Vader and Luke's actions in Return of the Jedi. It doesn't matter if this decision was made at the beginning of the trilogy or not, it was dreadful either way, it just so happens to be shoddily executed on top of that. All for the sake of bringing in another powerful antagonist and creating some lackluster payoffs as if it was mandatory to the story. We could have had a tighter focus on characterization between Leia, Kylo, Rey, Finn, and Luke's legacy. But instead, Disney brought back an iconic character from the dead to get bums on cinema seats, the side effect being systematically ruining him, other characters, and the conclusion of the OT by association. Bringing back a character who is explicitly dead, and whose death acted as the foregone conclusion to several character stories, and to the war that served as the world building for the story they were all in. Disney, if you are prepared to do that, what aren't you prepared to do to this franchise? Do you think I'm done? Well, I most certainly am not. Let's talk more about the writing in this film specifically. Who recovered his body? How did he get to this planet if it requires a special Sith object to find? Did he have one on his person? Well, that's later proven to be false. So, someone who recovered him did. The fact he is in one piece is more than enough reason for most people to call out the absurdity of this all. And yet from here, a corpse being controlled by some big robotic arm, he created a Snoke, either controlled or instructed him to build the First Order, which included a giant planet killer, and in the meantime he has been amassing a gigantic force of Star Destroyers. Firstly, who made this machine to keep you alive? Was it prepared in the event of your death? Why did you build a machine on a planet that requires a special tool to find? Secondly, why would you leave objects out there in the galaxy that can lead anyone to your front door? Did you not want them recovered to stop anyone from just stumbling by them and therefore allowing anyone a chance to discover you are still alive? Because apparently, at least one of them is easy to find. Thirdly, was building Starkiller Base part of your master plan, when it could have likely been the reason the galaxy stood up in defiance again, just like they did for the previous Death Star? It's just convenient for you that the New Republic was so spineless and cack-handed. Fourthly, you spent this entire time having someone build up a new empire for you while you simultaneously built up a fleet of planet-killing Star Destroyers, but you never drip-fed those vessels to Snoke to make use of. Tying into the third point, why was Starkiller Base a thing if you've been building hundreds of ships to do the exact same job, that are undoubtedly easier to make and have a far better chance of staying under the radar, since they are in an unfindable location, whereas Starkiller Base couldn't look more obvious. Fifthly, you have acolytes, thousands of them as the film later shows, and this fleet has been built in 30 years, so you must have had some manpower remaining after the defeat at Endor, yet you made a Snoke to create an entirely new faction after letting the New Republic rule for 30 years. You didn't lose everything after Endor. You would have still had dozens of strongholds, loyalists, and Imperial fleets left. Those could have been used to continue your campaign of conquest. Did much of that come here? And if so, how, if it requires a special MacGuffin? And sixthly, where did you get the resources to build all these new ships, or even update the old ones? This planet looks pretty bare. Were you sourcing these materials from other worlds? How did you transport those materials here? Again, remember, special MacGuffin. Was the First Order sending these materials to you while under the command of Snoke? Yet they also had enough resources left to build a planet death weapon of their own, and the Supremacy. And again, was Snoke even required to be the big cheese of the First Order instead of yourself? If you can't tell, the reveal that Palpatine has been at work in the background from the beginning is very, very flimsy. Plenty of explanations for why important events did or did not happen are not included. The stakes of this film are immediately thrown into orbit, and we as the audience just need to wait and see how it settles once more, since we have established that the writers of this film are prepared to play the reverse card on death. It's like Palpatine was just thrown in by JJ because he was too inflexible to change his original story post the train wreck of TLJ. A story I'm sure he already had planned in advance, which demanded a powerful, elderly Sith Lord at the forefront, driving the villain faction, and he needed a replacement after Rian subverted our expectations with his original creation. But the ripple effect of Palpatine's actions and continued existence was not considered by anyone at Disney or Lucasfilm, but I would never make that claim. And so the Star Destroyers rise out of the ground. Please make this stop. Many people have said that it was the Emperor lifting them out of the ground with the Force. So to what extent are his powers, if that's true, to lift so many objects of such huge size? I'm going to be more charitable and go with what I believe actually happened here, which was Palpatine gave the monologue and the ships just happened to time their reveal perfectly with that. Either way, why are they buried under the earth and then burst out of the ground when finished? That seems needlessly complicated. Especially considering no one is going to find the fleet at the planet because the location requires the MacGuffin. Not to mention, the accessibility of space is pretty confined underground instead of the air, which makes building them under the earth far more difficult. And dangerous, because you risk destroying the ships you just built thanks to falling debris. What if some of those rocks landed on the bridge of one of those Star Destroyers and crushed it, and then the ship fell out of the sky and exploded? This doesn't make sense, but it's a J.J. Abrams film, so go figure. You have so many! Where did this manpower come from? Again, you've got these forces for yourself, yet you did not supply the First Order with any of it, despite it also being a faction you ultimately made. Were the First Order just meant as a distraction? Yet you also wanted Kylo Ren this whole time, so they obviously have worth to you. By the way, every single one of these ships has the capability to blow up a planet. The film doesn't show this, I'm just jumping ahead in advance slightly because I want to make this criticism here. That kind of application can just be put on a normal Star Destroyer now. The caveat to something like the Death Star or Starkiller Base is that you needed a massive amount of power to perform such an act. Thus the station needed to be huge, the size of a moon, to accommodate the reactors that power the device as well as all other functions. Yet now that capability has been boiled down to some attachment you can fit to a regular ship. Brilliant. This isn't at all idiotic. Palpatine orders Kylo to kill Rey, and in return this new fleet will all be his, because when you have that many ships to rule the galaxy, the one thing you fear is a single girl. You decrepit, nonsensical goblin. So yes, this fleet, called the Final Order, is almost ready, despite the fact all the ships look pretty ready now, functional, and as we will see later, they all work. Palpatine doesn't send these ships out now because of Rey. I don't know how those two things are linked, the film just says so. I thought he wanted revenge on the galaxy. Is Kylo really required? Is Rey really an obstacle? Can't you just launch your ships now and I guess have a cup of tea with Kylo? Remember, this is a fleet the Emperor has been making for a while, yet over the last 30 years, he has squandered using them even after the New Republic are gone. There are hundreds of ships in this fleet. You would need only maybe 5 to eliminate the New Republic core worlds, which would have been much cheaper than the Starkiller base that was used. Classic JJ. More things, but simultaneously less stakes, and no self-awareness for what he's writing or what came before, even if what came before was his own work. Palpatine tells Kylo to take up the mantle of Emperor once Rey is dead. Kylo never asks why Palpatine is doing this, why he wants him in charge, or what he gains despite knowing the amount of effort Palpatine has gone through just to get him here, which is a question I certainly would have asked. Palpatine then warns Kylo that Rey is not who Kylo thinks she is. Kylo asks who she is, to which the Emperor just smiles. And thus ends this horrific scene. A scene which brings up more questions in Kylo's logic, it handwaves the survival of the Emperor, doesn't try to make sense of his plans, nor is it made clear why Palpatine wants Rey dead, but the intention will change later on, rather abruptly. It replaces the questions of who is Snoke to why is Snoke, contradicts itself in the other films, and bungles the opening crawl. Kylo went there to kill the Emperor, but is promised hundreds of ships, and now doesn't seem to have fears or suspicions on why any of this is happening. There is no reason given as to why he just can't kill the Emperor right now as he wanted, and take the fleet to rule anyway. The Emperor just says, "You can try, but I'll recover from it. Lol." His commitment to being good or bad seems to have changed once more. He is firmly in the "I will be bad" camp once again, but I wonder if that will change like it has before. Kylo's character is something we will continue to explore as this series goes on and he commits to the actions of the story. Trust me, we will be returning to him. The stakes of this trilogy are already in tatters. No doubt this film will end with the defeat and destruction of Palpatine, again, and this film will do its best to show that it is permanent this time. But the sense of finality to this final installment has already been lost for many people, because Palpatine has died once before, as he nonchalantly says with a disturbing lack of explanation for it. What's preventing the next writer for a hypothetical Episode 10 bringing Palpatine back again and providing just as little explanation? If the audience is willing to accept it once, surely they'll accept it twice, 3 times maybe? Fortunately, the next scene is a little better. We cut to the Millennium Falcon flying through hyperspace. Chewbacca is playing a game against Finn and Poe on the holoboard. We have a line about how they believe Chewie to be cheating as he has beaten them countless times, and honestly, it's a short scene, but it's wholesome and rather funny to watch this interaction.
How did you do it? This guy right here? It's because he cheats.
I'm kidding. Take your 250 years
taking
old.
forever. That's cheating. That's why we think you're cheating.
Apparently Finn can now understand Chewbacca, so I guess he learned to speak Wookiee at some point. As did Poe, which would make sense considering they have had a year together. Again, the film never specifies a year has passed, but that's what everyone has been saying meta-wise. The scene is then interrupted by a beeping noise indicating they are arriving at their destination, which is the large iceberg from the trailer, or it's an asteroid of some kind. They fly in to meet some character who delivers them some intel along with the information that there is a spy in the First Order, though who he does not know. This spy will be one of the many things in this film that could have been interesting, but ends up being wholeheartedly underwhelming. They plug something into R2 and download the intel. At this point, First Order TIE fighters appear on the scene. Many of them. It makes you wonder why our heroes were not on the lookout for hostiles on their approach to the giant space iceberg, instead of, playing a game on the holotable. It's also weird that the data takes so long to upload to R2. Finn comments on how this is going to be a lot of information, but it turns out that the information is just a couple of sentences. It's not like it's anything complex, like the plans to the Death Star. This wasting of time, combined with the fact the First Order drops into the scene out of nowhere, screams trap to me, but the film doesn't declare that, since it doesn't cross Finn or Poe's mind. We also see a very large, expensive-looking puppet on the ship for all of 2 scenes. It makes me wonder what its point is being on the vessel, especially since it apparently doesn't have arms. Why is this creature? It looks like an expensive set piece. It's in the film for all of 5 seconds, and it's utterly useless for any role aboard the Falcon considering it lacks the most useful appendage that should be required. It can't fix, fly, or shoot anything. This is not the same level issue as Palpatine's plan, and therefore the building blocks of the trilogy falling apart from square one, but I believe it shows the Disney Star Wars factory floor quite deftly. Pump money into it, make it look cool, who cares about context, logic, or reasoning? This is what I call the Claude effect, as to me, he represents the mantra of how this trilogy was made. No one was looking for this creature to be added to the film, yet the writers or designers of the Disney trilogy added the asset in anyway. No one took a step back and looked at what the film gains from including this, or what was negatively affected. They just put finances into it to make it look good, and then settled. We could have just as easily had R2 doing this instead before they arrived. They already have the model, so they don't need to make something new, and repairing ships like the Falcon is one of R2's many talents. Moving on. The intel is downloaded and they blast off, the TIEs in chase. Where these TIE fighters come from isn't explained, they were just in the area I guess. So yeah, they really should have prioritized something other than playing a board game with Chewie and leaving the repairs to the Falcon to the one creature that can't do it. But we need an action scene, so here the First Order are. Also, the guy providing the information says they can repay him by winning the war, despite the information he has provided proving that they have already lost. Keep that in mind, I'm not done with it yet. We have some flying through the iceberg, and Finn jumps on the turret to fire upon their attackers. Which is good. The way the film was going with inconsistency, I was half expecting Finn to be piloting and Poe to be the gunner. Small victories, people. Once again though, Finn has no compunction about who he is killing considering his history, though I suppose that's consistent too at this point. Chewie points forward and tells Poe it's possible to break the supports of the roof of the cave they are flying through to cause the supports to collapse and kill their pursuers. Poe agrees and instructs Finn to shoot upon the approaching metal beams, to which Finn responds, "I was just thinking that." Which is odd considering Finn is flying backwards and therefore cannot see the metal girders Poe and Chewie are referring to. Either way, Poe flips the ship over and Finn points forward, shoots the beam, it collapses and they kill a portion of the TIEs. After which they make their escape, bursting through an ice wall that was conveniently thin enough not to cause any structural damage to the front of the Falcon. Poe made an educated guess, I suppose, but if he had been wrong, this film would already be over. They jump to light speed, and the TIEs pursue. During this, Chewie complains to Poe, and Poe responds with,
Yeah, well, Rey's not here, is she?
meaning Chewie was ridiculing Poe's flying and implying Rey could do a better job. Okay, well, what happened to Poe being the best pilot in the Resistance? Has that position been usurped by Rey now? What is Poe's specialized skill in this film if piloting is now something he's only second best at? Also, if Chewie is complaining about Poe's flying, why doesn't he insist on flying the Falcon instead of Poe? He's been with the ship for the longest amount of time out of any of them. Do you really think Poe is going to challenge Chewbacca on that? If Chewie wanted to be insistent, he could. He'd win. Moving on, the Falcon begins to jump in and out of light speed multiple times, doing what Poe calls light speed skipping, where you make many jumps in succession to fool your trackers, I suppose, but the TIEs continue to pursue until they are all destroyed, after which the heroes are safe, and we change scenes. And I have to say, what the bloody hell was that? First of all, let's get this out of the way. Every single time they jump out of light speed, they appear to be in some kind of planet atmosphere. Space is vast. The amount of actual matter in ratio to nothingness of space is huge, yet we get 3 new locations in a row instead of empty space. Poe should consider entering the lottery with luck like that. Secondly, light speed skipping is done to fool the tracking systems the First Order have. Apparently, normal TIE fighters now have the capability to track ships through light speed instantaneously. It's no longer some big, complicated McGubbins on a Star Destroyer, it's a feature to every single fighter, so that problem has just grown exponentially. As long as one TIE fighter survives a battle, the First Order have a means of tracking their target. That fighter can transmit where their target has retreated to an entirely different fleet of Star Destroyers, which can show up at that destination. How did you manage to make this worse, JJ? Why would you? Thirdly, you still needed to destroy every pursuing TIE fighter before you were safe, making the multiple jumps and, as we find out, damage to the Falcon pointless. You could have stayed in the exact same quadrant of space and fought off the TIEs without taking a huge risk of jumping to other locations in quick succession. Thankfully, Poe has the reaction timings of a god, and therefore the Falcon doesn't hit anything after coming out of light speed. Fourthly, as we know from A New Hope, random jumps are very dangerous. Han Solo makes it clear that you can easily crash into a planet or fly too close to a sun, and that would be game over. This is a huge risk unless the jumps Poe made were actually calculated and ordered to fire off in quick succession. Fifth would be the fact that Poe jumps to these locations in rapid succession, mere seconds apart. How close were all these locations to each other, and if they were, how were they so varied? In the original Star Wars, light speed still took a while to take you places. Space is that big. There is plenty of downtime between light speeding to locations. This is something even the Last Jedi understood. For a real universe comparison, the nearest planet to Earth is Venus, and if you were to travel at the speed of light to Venus when it is at its closest to Earth, it would still take you 3 minutes to get there. Finally, as I said, you still needed to destroy the fighters before you were safe to make your actual escape. Yet Finn got off the Falcon gun, meaning the Falcon is now vulnerable, as the attacking TIEs have no worries about incoming fire. Finn, what are you doing? Instead, he's in the cockpit distracting Poe by asking him how he knows how to do what he is doing, to which he doesn't get a response. Poe then gets an extra dollop of luck when a giant worm creature in the last location reaches out and destroys the last 2 fighters, who just kind of blunder into it. We were actionless for a moment, appreciating some downtime, so JJ generated some drama for us out of nowhere. The set piece made no sense, and it has dealt more damage to the rules of hyperspace just to have a selection of fancy environments pass us by. Why? Can you not slow down? I'll tell you what this scene was for, to reaffirm to the audience that the First Order is still very much out to get the Resistance. There is a conflict still happening after a year, when the Resistance was shaved down to 1 ship and a handful of people, who managed to escape Crate without being tracked. But remember, as long as 1 fighter survives a battle, the First Order have a means of tracking their targets. That fighter can transmit where their target has retreated to an entirely different fleet of Star Destroyers, which can then show up at that destination. An unrecoverable collection of madness. This action set piece was thrown in to remind us that these 2 factions are enemies. It's not like we understood that from the informant saying, "Win the war." No, we had to see some action, and see how far the writers are willing to bend the rules that have already broken the world building. That's it. The scene ends and we cut to a new location, a jungle planet. And to Rey meditating, several feet off the ground, surrounded by many rocks which all swirl around her. Apparently focusing on the Force can allow you to levitate now. Not only has that never been a thing before, but the application of that power in combat or day-to-day activity is insanely useful. Jedi can ignore gravity, apparently. Does this mean Rey can fly? At the very least she can suspend herself in air, but the application that comes with that is mind-blowing. I get that it requires focus, but if you are able to do so, you can survive deadly falls, easily climb out of pits, cross large gaps, and so on. The only instance I can think of where this has happened before was in The Last Jedi. Not the best movie choice of the bunch. We get Luke floating in the air while heavily focusing, but for comparison, Luke was a few inches off the ground, not several feet. Rey makes this look effortless. She even nonchalantly says,
"They're not with me,"
and then lowers herself out of the sky. Rey's powers in this film flip-flop constantly, and I'm focusing on this meditation bit because I predict there will be a number of instances where Rey can do this to get out of a situation. Wink wink. She's apparently been trying to reach out to the voices of Jedi who came before. We don't know why or how this is a thing you can do, but either way, she stops, claiming the task is impossible. Which I automatically don't believe because nothing for Rey is impossible. As we shall see. Leia has been watching her this whole time and says that
"Nothing's impossible."
So Leia has been teaching and training Rey in this gap. As I already said, Rey's motivations for this are rather unclear, and we still have no idea what knowledge or power Leia has, though that will be answered at the end of the second act. It would be nice information to already have here, though. Rey repeats the words with a smile, and then asks to run the training course. Leia hands her Luke's lightsaber and she sets off. We see many of the shots from the trailer with her running, jumping, and fighting. And Rey starts combating some training droids that are shooting at her as she runs through the obstacle course. BB-8 is rolling along with her, pretending he's not a giant liability right now. Cut to Kylo, who's in his room, and the Mask of Vader is revealed. How he has this has been a question since Episode 7, and despite some heavy exposition thus far, we still have not got an answer for that question, and it will continue to not be answered. It's still dumb that he has this. He places his hand on the mask and begins to concentrate, while the not-so-subtle Vader theme plays in the background. Snap back to Rey, who is becoming frustrated that she can't hit a small training droid with her unwieldy baseball bat-swinging lightsaber technique. She cuts down several trees in an awful display of sword control, And this is all very odd considering this is a bloody awful display of control and combat, yet she has owned everyone in combat we have seen in the last 2 films, including trained guards and Kylo Ren. Coming back to Mr. Ren, who is still focusing on his mask, and snap back to Rey, who throws her lightsaber at the droid, misses, but then she picks up a stick and impales the droid with it. Wild, uncontrolled swinging with a lightsaber doesn't work, but wild, uncontrolled swinging with a stick does? Sure, you daft lemon. Rey then begins to have flashbacks of several scenes from her past and from the last 2 films alongside Kylo. And then Kylo leaves and Rey is in shock. I don't know what the snapping back and forth between Kylo and Rey had to do with this scene. Was he trying to look into Rey's past to trigger her memories? How would that work? Why is Rey having these flashes now of all times instead of during her deep meditation? Why was the Mask of Vader required for Kylo to do this to reach out to Rey? What is Rey's connection to the Vader mask? Why do you have it? Did you go all the way to the moon of Endor to collect the Mask of Vader, but not something else? Rey was obviously having an emotional reaction to this connection, hence her lapse in concentration and violent outbursts. But I still don't know how this connection works and how Kylo can trigger it. I thought their connection ended after Snoke was dead. I'm sorry everyone, but TLJ just had it so well laid out. Anyway, from off-screen we hear some BB-8 complaint sounds and we pan down to see he has been pinned by a fallen tree. I honestly laughed. Then Rey goes over to attempt to lift the tree with her dainty noodle arms. Physically lift the tree, when moments ago we saw her lifting rocks from mild meditation. She also lifted tons of rubble in the last film with an equal amount of effort. That kind of force power would be far more effective than trying to lift an entire tree with your bare hands. At this point, some of you might be thinking I'm nitpicking over Rey. Or if anyone is watching and wants to believe these things aren't an issue, I want to say this. Let's not pretend nitpicks aren't a problem. A film can have a multitude of nitpicks or just one. They are still issues with the film's quality, be it writing, production, or anything else regardless of how big we designate them. But nitpicks still need to be counted, because they can stack up. They can become something worse if we don't keep them in check. And on this occasion there will be further, more substantial problems that tie into Rey's constantly fluctuating list of abilities. I have already mentioned one for us to keep track of, being her ability to levitate. I have also provided an example of how this can develop into a narrative issue, acknowledging that there is a power Rey can use in this circumstance that she is not for some reason. In this case, it would be saving BB-8. It's rather small in the grand scheme of things that affect the plot, but it won't be the only one. It just so happens that in this instance, it doesn't break the stakes of the film. That's not to say it can't, and won't. We cut back to the Rebel base where Rey says to Leia that she was distracted and thus unable to finish her training for the day. Leia doesn't press what she was distracted by or if she's okay. Rey just says she feels off color and that some rest will do the trick. Leia is called over to do some generaling, but before she leaves, Rey hands back Luke's lightsaber. We know it to be Luke's because Rey says, "I will earn your brother's saber one day." And it's at this point I realized that Luke's lightsaber was torn in half in the last film. How did they repair the damage? There doesn't seem to be a mark on the weapon. There is a metal band wrapped around the point where it split, but aside from that, there's no evidence of scratches or damage. In fact, throughout the film, this lightsaber will work absolutely fine. Aside from the metal stripe, there is no evidence it was ever broken, ignoring one of the only impactful moments in TLJ, and quite the visual metaphor for how little JJ cares about continuing Ryan's dreadful work. It also shows how consequences for actions are going to be overlooked or undone throughout this movie, be it small scale or large. Wouldn't it have been a good feature to show the lightsaber to be temperamental, like it only works for a small amount of time before cutting out or something? Giving a restriction and an interesting struggle for Rey, who does not seem to have a hindrance at this point, out of random amnesia for her powers and her poor control of aggression. But yeah, it's just been undone. This isn't the first, and it won't be the last time that this happens. So we understand there's a master and apprentice relationship going on here. Though I'm more curious as to just how Leia has the ability to teach Rey anything. We get an explanation later on, but up to this point, we were given no scenes showing that Leia spent any time learning the Force, only that she has. It's a little jarring, as the explanation later on seems designed to simply fill in this question, when logically, this scene should have been shown way before. So we get some setup where her training and knowledge comes from. You know, show, don't tell. While on the subject of show don't tell, the next scene includes Rey reading through one of the
sacred Jedi texts
that she took from the temple on Luke's Island of Sadness. And she comes across a page that happens to include a doodle of the Sith artifact that Kylo found on what was apparently Mustafar. Unfathomably lucky, I guess, that she read this page today, the same day the Emperor announced his return. This scene, like the previous one, was very short and very abrupt, and we've cut once again. It's here to provide the plot a kick in the right direction, and for us to understand how. Could we not have had this scene of Rey reading the book back in her training section? Maybe she could have been reading it instead of levitating, removing the issue of that force ability and her own power. She gets distracted from what she sees on the page, and then we can have the Falcon interrupt the conversation in the scene that followed on. Thus, we get rid of this scene's necessity entirely, and this whole section has some choppiness removed. Remember, people, reshoots were done. So the Falcon has landed, and we see it has sustained damage from the pointless lightspeed skipping, as we have already covered. Poe's actions were unnecessary since the ties needed to be destroyed before they could make their escape. Poe makes some rather sheepish lines about how the Falcon is on fire and apologizes, and Rey comes in to challenge Poe about what he did to the Falcon and why. Poe then deflects the conversation to ask why BB-8 is damaged, but aside from a panel change, BB-8 looks mostly fine. Why Rey cares so much about the Falcon is a bit of a mystery to me. She doesn't even seem at all guilty for the damage she caused to BB-8, which was entirely her fault. Rey chastises Poe for his actions of lightspeed skipping the Falcon, saying that you can't do it because the compressor is down. Call back to episode 7. Apparently, lightspeed skipping is a thing Rey is aware of, so does the rest of the Resistance do this too? It must be a staple move to escape lightspeed trackers the First Order have, even though it really doesn't help. But if you aren't supposed to lightspeed skip the Falcon, why was that the ship sent to go collect this information? Lightspeed skipping is your method of escaping the First Order these days, yet you went out on this vital mission with the only ship that shouldn't do it because it causes major damage. Poor Poe can't seem to catch a break. The Last Jedi had him being constantly talked down to and ridiculed for taking risky actions that were absolutely the right call, saving the galaxy and the Resistance, yet he is being punished for it. And the first thing that happens on his return to base after pulling off the admittedly risky but only usable tactic because they were backed up against a wall, managing to save himself, Finn, Chewie, R2, not to mention Claude, the most useful character ever, the Falcon, and the information that drives the plot is that he is ridiculed by another smug character who calls him difficult. It's like poetry, extremely frustrating. Poe, on the other hand, seems to have reversed from his character arc in TLJ, which I consider to be a good thing, but it's wrapped up in the veil of character regression. What do I mean? Well, he learned the incorrect lesson to not take risks and follow orders without question, yet he goes against the rules of not lightspeed skipping the Falcon and taking the risk of its destruction, meaning he is not consistent with his character progression at the end of TLJ. Like I said, this is both a positive and a negative, since Poe's lesson in that film was ridiculous, so it's good on a level external to the film that he has not stuck to it, but it's still inconsistent writing with what came before. Rey asks Finn if Poe is in a bad mood, to which Finn responds,
Always?
Which, I'm sorry, when was Poe the character with a constant bad mood? Why is this a judgment of character you levy at him? He's been quite the quippy, friendly, light-hearted character.
You need a pilot.
I need a pilot. We're gonna do this.
Yeah?
Yes! Did you see that? Yeah! Finn, I like that! I like that!
I'm Poe Dameron.
Good to meet you, Poe. Good to meet you too, Finn.
I'm Poe. That's my jacket.
Oh.
No. Keep it. It suits you.
I don't want you to think I'm something I'm not.
Hey, it's fine. You're all right. You're here with us, where you belong. It's your jacket. I'm not much of a sewer. But, I was busy saving the entire fleet.
Even in extremely dark moments, which is a different criticism for the character altogether, because his facetious nature creates a tonal confusion for the event he is in.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Tell your precious princess there will be no terms. There will be no surrender.
Tell him Leia has an urgent message for him about his mother.
These moments with the characters going back and forth are decently performed, and it was good to see a bit of the dynamics of two big personalities clashing heads, with Finn trying to be the mediator while also backing up Poe, his friend, when he makes a solid point that Rey should be out there helping them achieve small victories, and it's unfair for her to criticize anyone for what they do in the field when she hasn't been out there for such an extended period of time. It's just a shame then that these group dynamics are being established in the last film of the trilogy as opposed to the first, as these exchanges would have had more weight narratively and emotionally depending on the person. The film is trying its best to establish how this group works. They have a strong bond but argue with each other when they're holding conflicting perspectives on how to solve the situations they are in. It's a character triangle that this trilogy had been missing. Two of them only share one scene together containing dialogue because they have spent the rest of their time apart up until now. All development post that moment happens off screen. We know they have likely shared moments altogether, but we haven't seen it for ourselves. Again, show don't tell. What's the result of this? Well, it's going to be different from person to person, of course, but the investment we have as the audience for their relationship is certainly not as strong as it could be, since their bond is based off interactions we haven't seen. I don't know what Poe and Rey's relationship is. What do they think of each other outside of Rey calling Poe difficult, despite saving everyone's lives? Again. I don't know what Finn thinks of this relationship. Whose side does he often take? Does he sit on the fence? Does he wish they would stop arguing? Do they even argue often? What does he think of Poe and Rey as individuals? This is the first time the three of them have all shared a conversation. We as the audience are left to surmise that it's a rocky relationship based on this first interaction that they all have. Rey cares more about the damage to the Falcon than Poe and Finn's well-being. She only asks Finn a quick question with Poe out of earshot, and it's got nothing to do with checking if Finn is okay. She gives him a cursory hug, then promptly moves on to ask about this spy. Poe doesn't even have a bit of dialogue along the lines of, "We are fine, thanks for asking," to say to Rey, implying he doesn't care if Rey cares about him or not. Rey must be able to assume that they ended up in a dangerous situation, right? That doesn't seem to cross her mind. Does she care that it was dangerous? Because Poe was forced to lightspeed skip the Falcon, which, as she says, he knows you can't do. Well, I mean you can, you just shouldn't. But he was given no choice, at least that's what the film is saying. Rey is just so blasé about everyone's well-being, despite the fact the damage to the Falcon is evidence that they were in danger. She's upset that the ship was damaged, but not concerned as to why they had to do it. It's like a casual frustration. Does Poe lightspeed skip the Falcon frequently and Rey is just tired of reminding him? If so, and people have to keep repairing the ship, just stop giving the responsibility of the Millennium Falcon to Poe. Give it to Chewbacca, for crying out loud. But yes, Poe ends the conversation saying she's the best fighter they have, but she's staying here, training, for what? Which is a good question. Why does Rey need the training? She's already as good as I think I've seen any Jedi. It's hard to accept the concept that these three are good friends based on this first interaction. What we actually see is frustration for each other's choices, contempt to each other's actions, caring more about pieces of technology than each other's safety, not choosing to take a side, and resorting to either yelling or name-calling. This relationship doesn't ever see a developmental cycle. It just sits here for a while, and then it changes. So, the next scene has Poe giving everyone the rundown of the situation. The Emperor is back. He has amassed the largest fleet the galaxy has ever seen, plans to attack all three worlds in the next 16 hours, and he is located on a planet in the unknown regions called Exegol, a hidden world of the Sith. How this information will help them win the war, as the informant said, is anyone's guess. Also, is this all the information we got? It was 3.5 lines, yet it required a giant cable and downloading the information directly to R2. If this is all you had, what was wrong with writing it on a notepad or just shouting it down to Finn? Why did it require this lengthy download which almost got you caught? Was it just to have this sequence of events? In terms of information to go on, this is basically nothing, because you have no way of doing anything about it without something massively convenient cropping up. So we've established a ticking clock. JJ loves one of those. The Emperor will attack all three worlds. I guess this means worlds that aren't under the control of the First Order currently? Sorry, but remind me again, to what extent are the First Order in control? Do any of these free worlds fight back? If these free worlds have heard this message, are they mobilizing their own forces? Will the world building outside of the Resistance actually ever be explained? Also, he will attack in 16 hours, which makes the line the Emperor made to Kylo about killing Rey, and in return he will get the Final Order fleet, obsolete. It turns out Rey isn't a problem for the Emperor at all, and whether Kylo achieves killing her in the next 16 hours is irrelevant because Palpatine will commence his attack either way. So what was his intention here? Is Rey really a threat? Is Kylo even needed? Do you want him in charge? Do you care? Why should I? Why did you put out a galaxy-wide broadcast hoping out of all the results Kylo will reach you first, so you can convince him to kill Rey, promising the final order as a reward for Kylo to use, if you are just going to use that fleet yourself, with or without him 16 hours later? And I'm still wondering why he's waiting. This damn broadcast is so unrequired, especially when you consider that it's the information from the spy that gets the Resistance onto the search for a way to Exegol plot, not the exposition provided by the title crawl. You could have cut the galaxy-wide broadcast thing out entirely and the Resistance side of the story would play out exactly the same way. Meaning, you could have made the broadcast specific to the First Order alone. Nothing story-wise changes, yet JJ chose to keep it as it is. He chose for this move of Palpatine to make less sense. Also, doesn't Palpatine want to rule the galaxy? That was always his intention with the Empire. Why would he build a fleet with the intention to blow it up? Why would you give every Star Destroyer that capability if that wasn't your desire? Do you really need to destroy the free world planets, when you can simply take control of them using the manpower you have from your immense-sized fleet and keep them in line through fear? What is there to rule if you blow up everything that you want control of, you damn cabbage? This is the Daenerys Targaryen complex all over again. It's doubly frustrating just how easily everyone accepts Palpatine is back. Aside from Rose, no one really questions this information. Meriadoc Brandybuck thinks he can come in to explain how this happened. He says it was
dark science. Cloning. Secrets only the Sith knew.
And everyone just sort of nods and agrees. What are you talking about, you turkey? There was literally a galactic-scale war less than 100 years ago which involved an army of clones, which were created by a non-Sith race, Kaminoans, so revered for their cloning technology to the point that greasy spoon owners knew about them. How does Disney and Lucasfilm think this is an explanation, when they own the rights to an incredibly popular TV show called The Clone Wars? That's what the galaxy knew it as. That's the name it was given. Are you trying to suggest that the characters in this universe forgot about that war too, or at least what one side of the conflict was entirely comprised of, but they remember the evil man who emerged out of it? This explanation is so daft. Silly old Merry, doesn't he know there is a far better one? The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. That's all you had to say. Explanation covered. No one stops to think about how sketchy this all is, by the way, that the information came from a spy in the First Order. No one talks about how this might be a ploy to lure them out of hiding, or lead them into a trap when they arrive at the planet. A planet that might not even be there as far as they know. R2 even comments on how Exegol doesn't come up on any star chart. It could all be a lie. The room isn't divided on this, and the conversation goes forward very smoothly. Do you remember in Rogue One when the Rebellion had a debate over the legitimacy of the information that they had received regarding the news of an all-time new evil weapon to appear in the galaxy, and that it came from what was essentially a mole in the Empire and a single unreliable transmission?
Death Star, this is nonsense.
What reason would my father have to lie?
To lure our forces into a final battle to destroy us once and for all.
Risk everything. Based on what? The testimony of a criminal. The dying words of her father, an Imperial scientist.
Oh, don't forget the Imperial pilot.
There is no hope.
I say we fight.
I say the rebellion is finished!
Information like that, or perhaps the information that the Emperor is still alive, would be very hard for many people to accept, and they would likely debate conspiracy theories on how this could be a plan to trick them. But I guess that prevents the plot from moving forward to the next explosive set piece, so just don't think about it. If I may just sum up the plot for our heroes as it stands, they want to stop the Final Order, they know where the fleet is but have no idea on how to get there. They have no way of beating this largest fleet the galaxy has ever seen, certainly not without a huge amount of help poofing into existence. But the more immediate problem is now they have this information, which they have decided is 110% trustworthy, they now have no more leads on how to get there. That is, if it wasn't for some superb convenience that occurred right before Poe arrived to deliver this information. The name Exegol gives Rey a light bulb moment. She goes up into her box where she keeps the books and pulls one out, then returns to speak to Leia in private. I don't know why she isn't willing to share this information with everyone, but meh. She explains to Leia and the audience that the book contains information about Exegol and how to get there. This book was written or repurposed by Luke Skywalker to document his findings when he went searching for Exegol, something he had been doing for an extended period of time. Luke discovered, somehow, that in order to reach Exegol, you need a special MacGuffin, of which there are apparently 2. Only 2, for some reason. The one that he had a lead on took him to a desert planet. No, not that one. No, not that one either. An entirely different one. Again. But upon his arrival and search there, the trail went cold and he ultimately gave up. I'm not quite sure what to make of this scene. It's surprising that Leia knew nothing about any of this. Apparently so anyway, because it needed to be explained to her by Rey. I guess when it comes to hidden evils, brothers and sisters don't tell each other anything. Despite Leia, as we later find out, also being trained as a Jedi. When and how did Luke find this information? If it was before he went into hiding, then it was a strange move to take the book with him instead of handing it off to Leia or anyone in the Republic, as the research is very valuable. He didn't tell anyone about what he had already found. What's more, Luke wrote in his diary knowledge on the Sith in Sith language that he somehow knows instead of a language that can be deciphered, or just common tongue. I'm not kidding, Rey says, "There are ciphers here I can't read," meaning Luke Skywalker wrote his knowledge on the Sith in Sith, or at least a language that many can't understand. What's the point of that if A, this is your private journal, and or B, it's a text meant to be read by future Jedi? What's even more, Luke took this book to Arc 2 and was prepared to burn this knowledge, as was Yoda, and doom the galaxy. It's fortunate Rey took them, otherwise our clue to finding Sidious would be ashes. What's even more, Luke never received help from any Force ghosts when it came to this mission to locate Exegol, be it the all-wise Master Yoda, or perhaps a former and redeemed Sith Lord like, I don't know, his father, who apparently was the owner of one of these 2, as we are about to find out, Wayfinders. So yes, in the book that Rey can't decipher the words of, it tells her that the object they are looking for is indeed a Sith Wayfinder, a compass that leads the way to Exegol. This is the same device Kylo has already found, and apparently he didn't need a book for guidance, so the method on how Kylo figured this all out once again comes into question. And so there we have it. The goal has been clearly laid out. The Final Order fleet needs to be stopped. There is a special Wayfinder MacGuffin to reach the planet the fleet is on, but the heroes would have had no leads if it wasn't for Rey stealing the Jedi text on a whim in the last film, and she happened to read the exact page that was of use to the plot minutes before the exposition was dumped by Poe. But the one that they need has a long scavenger quest tied to it thanks to Luke giving up on his research when the quest got too difficult. So they have to go travel to another planet to pick up on this trail that Luke dropped that might have a lead to where the Wayfinder is that leads to Exegol. It's lucky that the Wayfinder that Luke had a lead on isn't the one that Kylo already has, which, considering the information we later indirectly receive, and the fact there are only 2 of them, could have been entirely possible. That would have been awkward. But there you go. That's the opening act's plot. What a broth of unnecessary convoluted swill. We've talked about why it's rushed and poorly written, so now let's talk about what could have been. We could have been talking about a plot that focuses on the characters far more. This film depends on us as an audience believing there is a strong relationship between these people. This film will put their lives in jeopardy, and the way the characters react to those instances with each other will be the drama. But the only drama we have seen so far between the core 3 is that of frustration and conflict. Yet in terms of butting heads, this is the only time this happens to a large degree. The rest of the time they are together in this film, they will get on just fine. There is very little time to focus on building up or deconstructing their relationships because of the ticking clock and the ever-racing plot, taking us from location to location while perpetually circling around step 1 of this journey, acquiring the Wayfinder. If I was writing this, I'd want to go back and start over, but let's assume I need to work with what we have been given so far. I'd honestly remove the MacGuffin search entirely and focus on building up a fighting force for our good guys to use to combat the First Order, since the world building in this trilogy has been sorely lacking from the very beginning. We know far too little about the universe. Are there other major players? Do they fight with or against the First Order? What are their resources? What is the First Order's reach? This could have been something explored as our characters unite the minor factions to bring the small pockets of resistance together. tying into the message the film already tries to push, that the First Order wins by dividing our heroes, making them think they fight alone. As for our characters, they can gain perspectives on each other based on their past connections, and a large chunk of time could even be devoted to the Rey heritage thing on top of that. It could be a secret Finn and Poe uncover from Kylo Ren, who informs them of this as an attempt to break the group apart. They could struggle to work together with Rey after this, as they involuntarily become uneasy around her, or be burdened with the guilt of having to tell her. In terms of the Wayfinders, we can lose that part altogether. The mole in the First Order could transmit Exegol as a location to the heroes, who know where to go, but have no way to fight their enemy. And perhaps we can get a character moment for Finn, who alongside this spy cause an uprising in the First Order to cripple the enemy from within. I do enjoy exploring other avenues that stories fail to dive into, because there are plenty of other ideas to contemplate, and it can lead to elements of a story that could serve far better than what we were actually given. So when I think of something applicable to talk about and how I believe it would function better, I will bring it up and do my best to articulate my thoughts. You don't have to agree with my suggestions per se, but it's always interesting to consider what could have been done differently. Back to what we have. After a quick back and forth, Rey insists she will follow this trail to finish what Luke started and uncover the key to finding Exegol. This is also the most of Leia we see in this film, seeing as how Carrie Fisher tragically passed away after the filming of TLJ was finished and Leia's character was still alive. It meant there were a limited number of options that JJ could have gone with for the character, but there were other choices. I will save that point and explore it at a more appropriate time in this critique. Rey prepares the Falcon, which is already magically fixed from being on fire. Why did she make such a big deal about the condition of the Falcon to Poe if it could be repaired this easy? She tells the others she's going to the forbidden desert planet of Pasaana. Try saying that 5 times fast. Finn, Poe, Chewie, BB-8 and C-3PO say they are all coming with. Rey says she has to go alone, which she doesn't. And then when Finn protests, she says it's going to be dangerous, which, duh. As if they wouldn't be aware of that. They've been the ones on the missions this entire time, you dope. What was she expecting? Finn to say, oh really? Never mind then, I'll stay here with Rose. C-3PO is coming as well, I suppose that makes sense. They need to find information on Exegol from a random desert planet. A translator will be really useful for talking to the locals. About finding an item which is the key to finding a planet no one has heard of because it sits in the unknown regions of space, and the only person who had a clue to its location is considered a myth. This is a well-considered plan. Finn has a quick discussion with Rose before they head off. Rose gives some short waffle about how she can't come. She's to stay and analyze the design of old Star Destroyers in order to discover the weaknesses of a fleet consisting of new Star Destroyers. That makes sense. It's not like design iteration is a thing people use to improve what they make. Why Star Destroyers? What part of the information you received mentioned anything about the fleet being made up of Star Destroyers? I mean, you are right, it is, but at what point was the model of ship mentioned? It was just described as the largest fleet the galaxy has ever seen.
His followers have been building something for years. The largest fleet the galaxy's ever known. He calls it the Final Order. In 16 hours, attacks on all free worlds begin.
With the information the heroes have, the fleet could be comprised of any model of ship. Brand new ship designs you've never seen before. It could be a mix of frigates, destroyers, dreadnoughts, and supercarriers. It could be 72 supremacies as far as you know. But you're going to guess the fleet only includes one model of ship? Yeah, it's not like the Empire ever used other types of vessels in their navy. Speaking of which, analyzing Imperial tech, surely Finn would know a thing or two about that, much more than Rose considering he was part of the order that was born from the ashes of the Empire, and the model of ships in the Final Order are pretty much the same as the old versions of Star Destroyers, even though the heroes can't know that yet. Either way, Finn friend-zones her, and we move on. This means Rose is not coming. She gives a reason that will ultimately lead to the information the heroes gain to aid in the stakes of the third act of the film, but it does reveal something rather telling about JJ's approach to this film as a continuation from the previous. JJ is aware that Rose was not a liked character from a large portion of the audience that watched The Last Jedi. I don't know if he understands why. To sum up, her attitude was rather abrasive, and her writing made negative sense. That's not to say you couldn't try to improve her. JJ, however, is in charge of this film, and so has chosen to focus on the main trio of characters. They were his creations in The Force Awakens. This film is supposed to be about them, though it will turn out to be specifically about one of them. It was Rian's decision to keep them apart and add in an additional character with heavily flawed writing, clearly not recognizing that the main trio were the focal point of The Force Awakens for a reason, and so deserved to be kept together to build up their relationships in preparation for the third installment, which would give the closure to the trilogy far more punch. I would not say Rose's exclusion is representative of JJ fixing TLJ. It makes logical sense to refocus on the main protagonists. It is, however, once again one sentence of exposition, designed to serve as a quick explanation for why we are getting this outcome, one that only works if we don't think about it and just move on to the next scene of the film. So we are left to accept the answer we are given, regardless of the number of questions we still have. At least Rose got a reason as to why she can't come. What about R2? You brought him on the last outing, why not this one? Your intention on this expedition is to uncover and store vital information, which is exactly what R2 was used for in the opening mission. And now he's not coming? Okay, strange not to bring the family dog on this one. R2-D2 has been woefully underutilized by this trilogy. He's had about 5 minutes of screen time across the last 2 films, and his 2 most substantial scenes are just him being a thing that drives the plot in each. Rey and Leia share their goodbyes, and Rey tells Leia there's so much she wants to say to her, and Leia tells her to save what she has to say for when they get back.
There's so much I want to tell you. Tell me when you get back.
Meaning, if you're not following, this is the last time they're going to see each other. Leia hands Rey Luke's lightsaber, and Rey just accepts it. So much for, I will earn your brother's saber one day. That sounded like it was going to be a late film payoff or something. Never mind. They hug, and Leia tells Rey to never be afraid of who she is. Which is an odd line from Leia. Never be afraid of who you are? Does Leia know something? This might be relevant later. Wink wink. Though again, similar to Poe, Rey's relationship with Leia is entirely interpretational, as they have practically no on-screen relationship, nothing for us as an audience to harken back to for emotional twinges. I'm of course willing to accept they've spent a great deal of time bonding, but when we haven't seen it, it can be much harder to pull your audience into the emotional moment the film is trying to generate. This is why 3PO saying goodbye to R2-D2 and calling him his best friend had an effect on me. We had plenty of time to see their relationship throughout this saga, and so there is far more emotional weight behind this simple exchange. One last thing. During this section of characters saying goodbye, there is a 4-second scene in which Rey is just staring off at something. We as the audience don't know what. Poe approaches her to say they need to get going, when he notices Rey has gone on standby and asks her what's wrong, and Rey responds with, nothing. That's the scene. What was that? I thought this was going to be a moment for Rey and Poe to chat, maybe reconcile for their bickering, that it's all in the past and they need to team up to look out for each other now, otherwise they'll never get anywhere. That's what it feels like, the beginning of a longer conversation. The scene ends with Poe looking like he has something to say, but it just cuts, before we get any character building between these two. This is the chance for them to have a private discussion. Do you want us to believe these characters have bonded or not? Why was this left in? What is this scene? It's Rey being in a dissociative state, and then Poe walks over to interrupt by not having a conversation. Reshoots were done, ladies and gents. Anywho, the hero set off with a newly repaired Millennium Falcon to follow the lead that they have. Rey is now piloting the Falcon instead of Poe or Chewie, which is very odd considering I thought they would have been the better choice, but I guess Rey really is the better pilot. Poe just accepts this scathing and is happy to have his role usurped. Kind of makes you wonder what his speciality is in the group if Rey can do a better job than him at his defining trait. Her first mission in ages, and she's already stealing other people's roles and responsibilities. Can't ever have her sit in the background, can we? And that's it. Our heroes leave the jungle base and head in search for a lead on this MacGuffin. Their first ever adventure together as a group. My God. Meanwhile, Kylo is getting his helmet repaired, surrounded by some strange dark color-wearing figures. Why? We get to see how Kylo gets his helmet repaired, but not Luke's lightsaber. Really, does anyone actually care if Kylo has a helmet on or not at this point? Can we not focus on the actual character? JJ just wants the helmet back because it was on his character to begin with, and so we get a scene showing it being fixed. Once again, Cause and effect is out the window. Kylo, why are you only just getting this done now? You've had an entire year to address your wardrobe. Think about this from a character perspective. Kylo has his appearance insulted. It was treated as if he was acting childish to be hiding behind a mask. He was made embarrassed by it, and so in a fit of rage destroyed it and left it on the remains of the floor in the elevator before heading off to his ship to attack the Resistance fleet. But now we are left to assume that despite that motivation for getting rid of the mask, he comes back to the elevator to recover the pieces once he returns to the Supremacy after he assumes his mother has been killed. Or he asked some random trooper or janitor to carefully pick up all the pieces for him to collect later, just in case he wanted to have it welded back together. Couldn't we have just had a new helmet made from scratch? The Rise of Skywalker brings back both the helmet and the lightsaber, destroyed items from the last film, things that were supposed to be final, which sets a precedent now that consequences from the last film will likely be undone, as will consequences across the series, which I have covered. Whatever, it's short and stupid, as is the line from these two troopers. Once Kylo gets back from the weird monkey helmet repair guy, I don't know why they had to go to this location to get the helmet fixed. He's the supreme leader, surely he can send someone away to get it fixed for him, or he can summon the repair guy to his ship. This seems like taking an entire destroyer filled with garrisons and officers and your elite fighting squad with you on a personal errand. Not the best use of the First Order's time and resources if they're supposed to be subjugating the galaxy. Anyway, Kylo and his mysterious followers walk down a corridor. The two troopers who see these masked figures say,
Knights of Ren. Cool.
This is the hammiest dialogue I have ever heard, just to establish who these guys are, and honestly, the introduction to the Knights of Ren is about as throwaway as the rest of their time on screen. This was a way to state explicitly for general audience members who these characters are, and to those who don't know the meme as to how they have been forgotten, a frustration shared with many stronger fans of the extended Star Wars universe. But look guys, Knights of Ren.
Me?
That tends to be placeholder dialogue in a first draft script until you can create better dialogue or craft a better introduction, because as it stands, this is the most layman's way to introduce an audience to any character, especially if that character, or group, have been the talking point for fans since The Force Awakens. We also see that they are treading a lot of mud throughout the ship as they walk down the corridors, which, why is that a detail? The camera focuses on this, but we don't know why. We haven't seen them doing any activities on another planet yet. What is this emphasis on the dirt they're walking in? Was this originally linked to another scene of the film that was cut? It's like the shot is trying to tell us something, but it's not, it's just a weird detail they kept in. This is Kylo's personal ship, does he not ask people to wipe their feet? Kylo drops the head of the informant that shared the information with Finn and Poe on the table. Apparently they are now aware there is a mole in the First Order. I guess this means the First Order raided the iceberg for clues once the heroes had escaped, and the information was tortured out of the informant. Which really compounds two already mentioned details. That Finn and Poe took a ship that can't escape the First Order without sustaining critical damage to its internal systems to a location where the First Order have a strong presence, because how else would they have shown up in such large numbers in the opening otherwise? And neither Finn nor Poe were monitoring for First Order presence on their approach as a precaution. Kylo then addresses the room filled with First Order higher-ups that there is a traitor in their ranks, but they will not succeed. They will be found and punished. This is the first scene we get with Kylo now that the mask has been repaired. It's back to normal, though it has some weird red lines across it, like the glue is still hot or something. When he speaks, the voice modulator inside the mask works perfectly normal. He sounds just like he did in The Force Awakens, which is odd considering he caved the mask inwards. You'd think they could add in a detail for how he sounds a little different, perhaps slightly garbled to make him sound more twisted. Plus it would actually satisfy the quota of having some permanent repercussions for this action in the previous film. This is similar to my suggestion with Anakin's lightsaber. There is a bit of weird tone-clashing dialogue here. Kylo interrupts his little speech to address General Hux, who has some unease about Kylo's appearance, to which Hux responds a little sheepishly with,
"No, sir."
Are they trying to establish Kylo's lack of self-confidence in his appearance again? Apparently now having criticisms about it, even if they are internal, is warrant for sinister looks and threats. It's like Kylo is saying, yes, the mask is back, any problems with that? As if that's a topic for right now. Anyway, there's some awkward silence followed by another subordinate saying,
"I like it."
Alright then, I think he looks like a ballpoint pen, but moving on. In regards to this massive fleet they might be able to earn, and how beneficial it is to them, one of the officers comments on how the people on Exegol seem like a
cult. Conjurers and soothsayers.
They are providing you with a fleet of thousands. They could be Jawas for all you should care. They'd still have an enormous fleet of ships to give you. It's at this point that we get the first line of dialogue from a new character, a new Tarkin-style villain, General Pride, who counters the other man's criticisms exactly how I would, saying that regardless of who they are, they still have a legion of Star Destroyers. However, his intelligence is swiftly cut short based on his next action. He then directs his gaze to General Hux and says that the fleet will correct the error of Starkiller Base. What this line of dialogue is trying to imply is that Hux is being held accountable for Starkiller Base's destruction in The Force Awakens, and that Hux's contempt about that notion will fuel his later actions. The film's reasoning is that he is looked at as a failure and is unrespected by his peers. However, General Hux is the one villain in The Force Awakens who is the least to blame for Starkiller Base's destruction. It was Captain Phasma who lowered the shields at the base at Blaster Point despite apparently being blaster-proof. This is a point that is never brought up in the rest of the trilogy. And it was Kylo who failed to acquire the map to Luke Skywalker and failed to raise an alarm to Hux in time. General Hux was never made aware of the hero's incursion onto the base until it was too late. Throughout the film, he is shown to be a ruthless and logical thinker who makes very few mistakes. He even somehow located the Resistance secret base for you, leading to the opening plot of The Last Jedi. Not to mention, he is the one that ordered the destruction of the New Republic using the very weapon General Pride is speaking of, wiping out the First Order's only major opposition. That doesn't sound like an error to me. One of the officers from off-screen mentions how they need to increase recruitments, harvest more of the galaxy's young.
We'll need to increase recruitments, harvest more of the galaxy's young.
Which is kidnapping, not recruiting. I can't imagine the First Order would have a problem calling it as it is. This is an attempt at world building, answering the question of where the First Order gets its forces from. This is something we already had answers on thanks to Finn. They can just steal children and indoctrinate them, but they are just able to do this without any difficulty. As we learn later into the film, the galaxy core worlds aren't exactly being subjugated, or being forced into compliance through sanctions. They have the forces to combat the Armada at the end of the film, but you are telling me no one stands up to child abduction despite that? Also, why would you need to boost recruiting, as you put it? Why? Palpatine's fleet comes fully staffed, deck officers, gunners, pilots, soldiers, etc. They all come with TIE fighters and garrisons. You don't need more recruits, he's prepared to give you the lot. He'd need to use them anyway if you did not complete his task in less than 16 hours. You would be forgiven if you did not believe this film could have this many flaws, but it really does. It's a cavalcade of stereotypical poor writing. Unthought-out one-liners to build plot or provide explanations, bad dialogue choices, and unbelievable contrivances.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'm still going. To close off this meeting, the first officer who spoke then asks another question. A very reasonable question, one I have already made myself.
This fleet, what is it, a gift? What is he asking for in return? Does that...
Alrighty then. What's the point of summoning this board of higher-ups if you aren't prepared to answer reasonable questions, you monochrome clown? Oh, is it because it mimics Vader's actions in A New Hope? This would be a very bad argument considering Vader's actions were tempered by Tarkin, who orders him to stop, to which he complies. It's an insight into Vader's character. He will not be belittled, but he is not beyond listening to reason.
Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes, or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels' hidden fort.
Enough of this. Vader, release him.
As you wish.
Whereas this man asked a legitimate question that they all should be thinking. Is this damage control for the script? Kill any in-universe characters who ask questions about the plot? It's like JJ wrote the dialogue and then realized he had no way of writing a rebuttal, so decided to close the lid on the conversation with Kylo throwing another temper tantrum. Kylo orders his board to crush any worlds that defy them, which, old news, you've already been doing that for a year now. And while they do that, he and his knights are going to hunt for the scavenger, referring to Rey. He has no leads on this, but we'll get there. So, our group of hapless nitwits have arrived on the curry-named planet at the location that was indicated in Luke's diary of doodles to be his last lead before he stopped searching for reasons. They arrive at their destination and find a festival is going on. C-3PO explains what the festival is, and that it apparently only happens once every 42 years, and they just happen to arrive at the time it occurs during their very important mission. JJ, do you want contrivances in this film? Do you think they're beneficial or something? Keep the festival if you want it, but why would you put in an unnecessary line that causes it to become a contrivance? I get it, 42 years since A New Hope, Easter egg and all that, woohoo. But did you expect people to clap when the fact of the matter is the script has just arbitrarily made our heroes extremely unlucky? The lines from C-3PO are interjected with some effective comedy where the group turn around to look at him and the confused droid pauses, and then turns to see if they are looking at something behind him, like he doesn't understand just how annoying he can be at times. After plus 50 years of people like Han Solo making it explicitly clear, you'd think it would have dawned on him, but either way. This bit of comedy was in character for C-3PO, being a direct-speaking character who delivers unwanted information at inappropriate times yet does not recognize this, along with an almost passive-aggressive tone to everything he says. Right situation, right time, this can work very well. So they explore the festival town and we see an impressive amount of production work that went into the characters, music and environment. It's just a shame that it's now been all built on a huge contrivance. I mean, even if the festival wasn't here, they'd still need to search a giant desert, but I guess that would be boring. There would be less noise on screen, and so JJ would need to focus on writing careful dialogue between his characters to fill in the quiet. Even though I thought the reason he didn't bring Rose along for this mission was to specifically focus on his characters. Poe then comments on how they need to keep their heads down, as there are always First Order patrols in crowds like these.
There's always random First Order patrols in crowds like these. Keep your heads down, Chewie.
Why? Why would the First Order have an interest in festivities? It's a throwaway line, boys, don't think about it. Rey stops to look at some children and laments over how she never had a childhood like it. During this moment of reflection, she is approached by a local who puts a necklace around her. 3PO translates the local, who is asking for her family name. Rey, of course, does not know her last name and is clearly bothered by it, while putting on a brave face to the local who has shown her kindness. So the film is bringing up her parent mystery again, perhaps wanting to retcon or at least restructure what The Last Jedi put in place. Wink, wink. This certainly seems like a setup. However, another level of contrivance has now been made and another will shortly follow. Rey, by coincidence, reads a page in a Jedi book which covered a subject that would provide useful information around the mysteries of Exegol, a place that Poe will announce has been revealed to be real moments later. The lead they conveniently have at the convenient time takes the heroes to a location where a festival occurs once every 42 years, and Rey, the character who is only defined by the mysteriousness of her parents, is the one to get a necklace off a random local, and happens to be the one Kylo can contact through Force Skype power, which he just so happens to do immediately after this moment to reach out to Rey to find her location. What is this film? So when Kylo said he'd hunt for the scavenger, I guess that meant he's going to his room to force FaceTime her. Has he been doing this often throughout the year? It's fortunate that he never uncovered the Resistance jungle base if he did. How is he even able to do this if the only reason Rey and Kylo could ever speak was through Snoke linking their minds?
You're not doing this. The effort would kill you. Can you see my surroundings?
You're gonna pay for what you did.
I can't see yours. This is something else.
Not to mention, I thought The Last Jedi showed that connection was over. It's now an integral plot point to move events in the story. It's not even to serve characters now. And of course, he just so happens to do this once Rey has received a necklace, which ends up being the reason he is able to find her. I'm getting to that. And she just so happens to receive it from a random person at a festival they had let's say the planet has an annual orbit of 365 days, times 42... roughly a 1 in 15,330 chance of turning up to on the right day. I'm not kidding, the getting the necklace and then Kylo calling happens back to back in 20 seconds. Kylo explains to Rey through this Force call that Palpatine wants her dead, but he has other plans. He wants to turn her to his side. We don't know why he wants this, there is no motivation for it, as far as I can tell at least. Does someone have an explanation? Please provide it to me in the comments section below.
You can't hide, Rey. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to turn you to the dark side.
Kylo made this same offer to Rey last film, and it was rejected. Rey then escaped, and Kylo went back to being a psychotic leader of the First Order, and has apparently been doing that ever since, but still holds this motivation for turning Rey because... dyad? Oh, we'll get onto that, but not like for a couple of hours at least. We don't even know how they are able to do this, considering Kylo commented last film that the effort would kill Rey. He clearly wasn't doing it then, and we assumed it was because he knew he'd have a similar fate if he tried. Yet he can do it himself now, no problem. So yes, the film is doubling down on this Force ability, but it takes it one further when Kylo reaches out and takes the necklace off Rey. They have just established you can transport physical objects from person to person via connection in the Force. Oh god. First of all, how did Kylo know this would even work? He reaches out very purposefully and takes the necklace, so he obviously had an inkling or evidence he could do it, right? I suppose this was mildly hinted at with the dice and the water in TRJ, but the fact this can now be done for larger scale objects is groundbreaking stuff for Force capabilities, which are now being extended beyond what many can reasonably believe. This is another power for Rey and Kylo to keep track of alongside Rey's ability to levitate herself and many other heavy objects. Being able to mind trick people, push or pull things around, as well as having heightened strength and speed and a sixth sense is rather small scale for the Force compared to bending reality and physics. You need to be extremely careful with this kind of stuff, as keeping track of something so monumentally powerful is going to be very difficult. You can easily write yourself into an issue where your stakes are ruined because this power would in fact act as a solution. Wink wink. The issue with it is that it opens up a lot of possibilities for Jedi to help people. Transporting matter seemed accidental in The Last Jedi with the rain, but the Rise of Skywalker makes it clear that this is essentially Force teleportation. That raises the question as to what the limits are of this ability. Can you transport yourself to a different location using the Force? Can you transport someone else? How large scale can this go? Can you send a ship? In this instance, I think this is something The Last Jedi handled as a concept far better, and that's uncomfortable for me to say. The idea, which almost saved the concept, is that the film established a limitation with the fact that you needed to be insanely powerful to do it, combined with side effects that are out of your control, even for that person, and it's so strenuous it can result in your death. The Rise of Skywalker drops any nuance this power might have had, and they make it so that things can be teleported. It's not an impossible Force ability if you kept the limitations The Last Jedi provided. The trouble is that now it brings up a multitude of new questions, some of which could have helped Jedi in certain instances from previous films. The Jedi Council in the prequels would have had a much easier time sending information back and forth if they could have just transported objects to one another from across the galaxy. You want to try and convince me that Master Yoda never discovered this power over his 900-year lifespan? When you write in a new ability, you need to be careful that you're not contradicting pre-established rules or yourself down the line. For an example, in chess, the move of castling is considered an add-on. The game functions the same with or without it, but if you were to suddenly say that a bishop can now jump over multiple pieces during its movement if you, the controlling player, wishes, you've shattered the rules of the game. In spite of what some might say, lore acts not only as establishment but as the ground rules to a story's universe. You have to work within what you have been given, and if you plan to write something that counteracts the established lore, well, you're going to need to put in the effort to explain why this new situation you have made is a unique case, and include its own restrictions. Now, please stay with me because sadly, things still get worse, which, funnily enough, is a segue I could use anywhere when discussing this film. Rey immediately warns the others that Kylo Ren is coming, though how she would know this to be true or not is not explained. We didn't get a line from Kylo saying something like, "There you are." He just takes the necklace and breaks off the call. How does she know the necklace gives away her location? It's been at best a minute, so of course the necklace Ren now has a hold of has already been analysed and they have located its origin. The object doesn't even dissipate like the dice did in TRJ, so the power has changed as well as increased in plot convenience. Also, the necklace works as a way of locating what planet they are on and specifically where on that planet. What if it was an antique that Rey had bought off someone days ago and she was chilling out on an entirely different planet to where the necklace originated from? Can you confirm that to not be true, Kylo? No, whatever, so we cut back to the heroes who are running back to the Falcon. They are just convinced the First Order know their location based off one random necklace, and a single stormtrooper intercepts them. He got here fast. I guess this is one of those patrols Poe mentioned? But then he's shot dead by a crossbow bolt through his mask because the First Order armor is made of jelly. No one at the festival reacts in fear to the fact that someone has just been shot dead with a projectile sticking out of his brain. No one bats an eye. Things carry on as normal. I'm not pulling you about here. The locals watch a masked character shoot dead a trooper belonging to the most currently feared force in the galaxy, and no one makes a sound. Our heroes all leave following this strange character, and the partying continues. What the fuck? So they follow this strange character into a sandcrawler of some kind, and the character mentions how he received a transmission from Leia, and he found them because naturally Chewbacca is quite hard to miss. He takes off his mask, and it's revealed to be Lando Calrissian. Chewie and Lando then hug. Ah, I hate this. This means that Leia had a contact with Lando this whole time. She knew he was on this planet and told him to keep an eye out for Chewie and the others when they arrive.
This is General Lando Calrissian.
We know who he is, 3PO.
It is an honor, General.
They all know Lando as General Calrissian, but they weren't told to look for him in particular, which is an odd decision on Leia's part. She didn't mention to any of them to keep an eye out for Lando, or just set up their meeting before they all left on the Falcon. Think about this, if she'd done that, they wouldn't have had to wander around the festival, Rey wouldn't have received the necklace, and so Kylo couldn't have used it to locate where they were. What is this film? How far down the rabbit hole of stupid is this prepared to go? If Leia has a contact with Lando, why hasn't Lando provided her with information he has about the Sith Wayfinder? Leia could have told Rey and the others what exactly they were looking for, i.e. Ochi's ship, saving a great deal of time and plot contrivance. It's like they kept Lando out of the film until now so his appearance could serve as an emotional reveal, instead of including him when it was the most logical to the story.
He showed an early cut of the film to Michael Arndt. When he saw it, one of his first notes was, you should lose the scene where you meet Leia earlier, because it's a far more powerful thing to meet her again through Han Solo's eyes at this point in the movie when you need a breath of fresh air.
Why did Leia need Rey to explain to her what exactly they need to go to Exegol if she has contact with the man who went to go find it? Lando is apparently an old contact. Remember in The Last Jedi when our heroes were cornered on Crate and were about to die, and Leia puts out a call for help that no one answered? Does this mean that Lando didn't pick up the phone for Leia pleading for her life? Was any thought put into this series of events at all? And going back slightly further, the trooper who just turns up to get shot? Let me explain. JJ goes through the contrived method of giving Rey a necklace that Kylo can use to locate her whereabouts, creating a great deal of convenience and dealing damage to the capabilities one can have with the Force. But why couldn't the means of discovering their location just have came from this one trooper? Given we get a line about how they have patrols stationed here,
there's always random First Order patrols in crowds like these.
Have the trooper intercept them, call the rest of his patrol that he has identified the fugitives, and the patrol can report it. Kylo learns Rey's location, specifically where she was last seen. Everything plays out the same, and it makes far more logical sense. Certainly more than a character being given an object at the exact same time another character looking for them force called and could use that convenient object to locate her. It was almost that anyway, but the necklace thing was added on top when the trooper report alone would suffice. The hug between Chewbacca and Lando was nice though. These characters have a history and care for each other. And apparently they haven't spoken years because Leia never picked up the damn phone. So it makes sense. It's not a fan service thing. In fact, it would be a criticism if they didn't hug. Though Lando's reasoning for finding them is Chewie, which is a little flimsy considering the scale of this festival and the fact there are so many tents alongside coloured smoke to block out line of sight. Also a criticism levied against this random soldier just stumbling upon them. Lando is in this film to drop a big exposition dump to our heroes and the audience. I'm paraphrasing, but he came here with Luke to find the Wayfinder and had a clue to its location through the form of Ochi, an old Jedi hunter. However, Ochi went missing, his ship is abandoned out past a canyon, and searching it yielded him no clues. It's unclear why Lando is still here though. He went with Luke years ago. Luke came back, but he stayed instead. Why did he leave his friends to remain on this planet? Did he return? If not, why? And once again, did he not already share this information with Leia years ago, and thus save our heroes the time wasted wandering around a festival only to get caught out thanks to some unfortunate necklace? Apparently, Ochi's ship is still out in the desert. It's not stripped for parts or stolen by now. Convenient. Lando doesn't come with our heroes to show them the ship location himself, he just sends them on their way, and he is out of the film until much later. He didn't come with them for reasons.
Leia needs pilots, General.
My flying days are long gone.
We don't even get time to appreciate Lando in this moment before we move on, and I will talk about the film's pacing so far after the next action scene. During this small but dense dump of expository nonsense, Kylo Ren and his forces have shown up. It's been exactly 1 minute and 35 seconds since Kylo Ren first grabbed the necklace, and this has all been happening in real time for the movie, so the length of time is the same in universe. He got here that quickly. I don't think JJ knows space quite how we know space. Light speed is not an instant teleport thing, like video game fast travel. The heroes make their way to some speeders, commandeer them, and set off with the First Order troops in pursuit. It's fortunate that the First Order didn't chase them down with some fighters, despite the fact we heard them overhead and saw them moments ago. They give chase with some tracked vehicles, and apparently their troopers can fly now.
Oh, they fly now!
They fly now?
They fly now!
9 films in, they discover they can fly.
This criticism is one that went around a lot when the clip was first revealed as a teaser. It's kind of harmless, to be honest. But why Finn is unaware the First Order have jet troopers is a little bit questionable, especially since this kind of technology has been in Star Wars for a while now. So Poe and Finn's surprise reaction to the First Order, who already have massive technical prowess, also having jet troopers is slightly strange. Perhaps a more fitting exchange would be 3PO exclaiming they fly, to which Finn responds, "Of course they fly," and Poe can repeat with a sigh, "Of course they fly." Just a suggestion. It's confusing though that in the same breath I have to talk about the fact the speeder bikes are using tracks. So we have troopers that can fly with jetpacks being advanced technology while simultaneously being aided by a vehicle that has regressed in technology as it relies on treads instead of hovering like the speeders we have seen in the past, or even the ones the heroes are using. The First Order give chase with their wibbly-wobbly technology, and our heroes shoot back with their blasters but are ineffective against the forward shields these speeders have. So the heroes split up on their commandeered speeders, and thus the First Order do too. Why they don't call for air support in this chase is beyond me. BB-8 sets off a canister from the back of the speeder him, Chewie and Rey are in, which blinds the First Order speeder bike that was chasing them. It accidentally goes over some rocks, launching it into the air, to which Rey fires her gun, destroying it from underneath while repeating the line,
"Never underestimate a droid!"
Nice callback, but who is she speaking to in this scene? Chewbacca? I seriously doubt Chewie would be one to underestimate the usefulness of a droid in dangerous situations, considering he has been witness to their usefulness and saved by the likes of R2 in films such as A New Hope. Meanwhile, the other First Order bike is firing upon Poe, Finn and 3PO. Finn responds by throwing some kind of chain off the back of their speeder, which tangles up in the bike's front track, causing it to lose control, and thus Poe is able to force it to crash. So much for the shields on those bikes preventing incoming projectiles, and we've proven why treads are a terrible choice over hovering bikes without needing to say a word. As with the established hover bike, the uneven terrain and concern of having foreign objects impede movement are not issues. That is the strict benefit over the tracked design. I guess the First Order didn't think of that. Rey spots Ochi's ship in the distance. It's parked up, just like Lando said it would. It seems to be in pretty good condition for something that has been left to the harsh desert environment for 30 years. Rey comments on how the ship seems familiar, and we're going to get to that. But before we can reunite and come to a stop, the remaining jet trooper manages to land both of his rocket shots, blowing up both speeders, and our heroes crash. Of course they survive, plot armor, and they shoot the jet trooper down, but then they begin to sink in what turns out to be quicksand. How unlucky that with all the space they had, both speeders they were on happened to crash in a way that lands all of our heroes in the quicksand. During the struggle they start to disappear under the surface, but it's okay, and I told you I'd bring this back, because Rey has the ability to levitate off the ground and lift up heavy objects like rocks. She should be able to escape from here and save her friends, right? Well, no, she doesn't even try that, despite the fact it's been established. Rey can avoid being impeded by any uneven surface using this ability. She can just start to channel the Force and lift herself up. You'd think she'd try, even if she was submerged, or she could just lift the sand off them. I told you the consistency with her powers would flip-flop. What is the reason why she can't do this right now? This also links back to what I said over the Kylo Rey Force Call. When you write a new ability, you need to be careful you're not contradicting the rules or yourself down the line. You can easily write yourself into an issue where your stakes are ruined because this power would in fact act as a solution. This is an example of what I have peppered through so far coming together regarding Rey's abilities. This is also an example of where a previous nitpick regarding Rey and the tree is once again applicable in the same way. Or rather, the criticism is the same for both. She is shown to do X here but doesn't do it in this situation. In the first example regarding why Rey doesn't use the Force to lift the tree, its overall relevance to the story is minimal. It's a very small issue as the plot of the story remains unaffected as to whether or not Rey uses the Force to lift the tree. This time though, the same criticism has a very big impact on the plot. As we will later see, our heroes couldn't have found the next MacGuffin that drives the plot without falling into the quicksand, which is only possible if Rey forgets this power. This, ladies and gentlemen, is why small criticisms, or nitpicks, need to be kept track of regardless of how insignificant they might be by your metric. If they go unchecked, they can snowball into having detrimental effects on your story because you as a critic or a writer are not keeping an eye out for them. Not that they definitely will, but they can. There is a brief cutaway to the Resistance base where an informant lets Leia know they have lost contact with Rey, Poe and Finn as they aren't responding to their calls to the Falcon, and a quick joke is played. This scene is fine, there's pretty much nothing to it, but it's alright. Now that the whole sequence is over, let's return to the pacing, as I said I would. To be blunt, it's a mess. Pacing can refer to how a story is written and how it's plotted, but in the end, it's the same thing. I'm not sure how many people will agree with my definition, but for me, whether it's applied to a single scene or the plot as a whole, the pacing is the speed at which your viewers see things progressing. It's basically what tempo is to music. The pacing is how slow or quick your story is told to your viewers. Timed and controlled pacing is important because it evens out the edges of your story so it doesn't feel disjointed, or like there wasn't much thought put into the sequence of events that unfolded. In the case for the Rise of Skywalker, it's rushing. We've had so much happen in such a short space of time, and it's detrimental to establishing characters, relationships, or atmosphere, and so on. The film hasn't taken a breath in the last 8 minutes. We've gone from the arrival at Pasaana, explore festival with throwaway line about trooper patrols, gaining of necklace, immediate loss of that necklace which provides the villain a trail to follow, encounter a different way for the villain to have a trail to follow, encounter a mysterious character who saves them. Mysterious character reveals to be Lando, but don't sit with that for too long, exposition time. Now heroes leave character and have a short chase, lol callback underestimate droid, crash, sink in quicksand because someone has amnesia. We, as the audience, can't afford to get drawn into any of this. Even the return of a beloved character who's not been seen for 30 years. There's no time for character in this for Lando, or Poe, Finn, Kylo even. He just explains his motivation right away. Lando's service to the scene could have been anyone, a random grunt alien creature, because it's just exposition. In fact, Rey is the only one who gets a semblance of character explored, but it's ground that's been covered twice before. As a writer, you should ask yourself what's absolutely necessary for your readers to understand the scenes and the motivation. Ask yourself, if the reader didn't have this information, would it still be impactful? There was a way for the First Order to learn of their location more organically anyway. Imagine if our characters had just sat with Lando and had a proper back and forth discussion while Lando took them directly to Ochi's ship in his landcrawler, and we didn't have the First Order arriving so suddenly. Imagine if we'd not had the Force call and just had our characters doing a bit of searching and bonding. Some quiet and slow moments of them just discussing things. We had this sort of stuff in the elevator rides in the prequels, for crying out loud. It established that the characters had a history of adventures together we hadn't seen, but how they recount them is insight into their relationship. I'm happy to admit it's not brilliant, but it's something to latch onto. This pacing issue is not exclusive to the hijinks on Pasaana, it's across the movie, expose to expose, location to location, plot point to plot point, and because of the rapid-fire pacing, I'm wishing for a simpler film. A simpler concept for a narrative to follow. It's like the film is afraid to take its foot off the accelerator or it will lose audience attention, so it keeps going at breakneck speed, dazzling that audience with new locations and action set pieces, hoping you'll come out of the cinema thinking you at least had fun.
In the latest Rise of Skywalker clip released, the group realizes that the stormtroopers have jetpacks and can fly now. What was your first reaction upon seeing that?
They fly now!
He forgot. But what if that was the first time they used them?
They've been using them since the Clone Wars.
We rejoin the heroes, who are apparently fine. They sunk right through the sand and have ended up in a cave underneath the ground. What is geography? They fall through the sand and into a tunnel. How does this sand not collapse? What is holding it up? If there was a solid base to this quicksand which doubles as the roof of the tunnel, then our heroes couldn't have fallen through it and they simply would have drowned. How can something when en masse behave like a fluid, also have the structural integrity to behave as one solid object and be the ceiling to a cave? It goes without saying, it's beyond luck that there is a hole at the bottom of this quicksand pit to save them, because Rey forgot her powers she was practicing less than an hour ago, even if the hole makes no sense. Poe does a quick head count to ask if everyone's okay and neglects to name 3PO, to which the droid responds.
Rey! Finn! You didn't say my name, sir, but I'm alright.
And again, another good line of well-realised dialogue from Goldboy. What isn't good dialogue is the part where Finn said to Rey he had something to tell her when they were back drowning in the quicksand. Naturally, he believed it was the end, because no one would expect a hole at the bottom of a quicksand pit to spit them out into a cave. It defies logic and gravity.
Rey! Rey, I never told you when!
Rey asks Finn what he was about to say before they went under the sands because it sounded important, and Finn simply says,
I'll tell you later.
Voice will remember that line. Poe overhears the conversation and also presses the question in a passive-aggressive tone, implying they shouldn't feel the need to keep secrets from each other at a time like this.
You mean when Poe's not here? Yeah. We're gonna die in sand burrows and we're all keeping secrets?
And he's dead right. As they continue through the tunnel, Poe comments on how he doesn't want to know what made these caves, implying they are not naturally formed. 3PO begins to explain humorously, and Poe repeats that he doesn't want to know. The dialogue from this group overall is mostly fine, despite some problems I have mentioned, and the humour so far I believe to be decently executed and characterised well, especially for 3PO, which I can't believe I'm saying. They then find a speeder with a Sith emblem on, belonging to Ochi, and then shortly after, Ochi's remains. He's long dead. Apparently, Ochi suffered a similar fate to our hero's current predicament and died down here. Coincidental maybe, but the larger question would be why Luke and Lando didn't think to search the quicksand pit for Ochi when they first located his ship and found it empty. There was every chance he fell in, and apparently the two of them just never looked despite the quicksand pit being blatantly obvious. It goes further though. The spot of bad luck landing in the quicksand turns out to be good luck, as they have not only found Ochi's body but also clues as to who he was and the third MacGuffin of the film, the Sith dagger. And all of this would not have happened if our heroes had not crashed thanks to a random jet trooper suddenly having great aim despite how the rest of the chase transpired. And if our heroes had been driving their respective speeders just slightly to the left or right of the pit on their approach to the ship. And if Rey had not forgotten a force power she had practiced not long ago that could have saved them all from what they believed to be certain death. And it wouldn't have happened if the quicksand pit did not also somehow double as the roof of a cave so they could fall out the other side. What happened to cause and effect? This is just an adventure line of random fortunate occurrences. So yes, Ochi's dead, but the hero's lead remains with the discovery of the Sith dagger. Rey senses the dagger's past, or something, and comments on how it's been used for terrible acts. And Poe comments that it's covered in writing. Got to love the fact Rey is commenting on how the dagger has been used for terrible things in the past when she is already holding a weapon that has slaughtered rooms filled with children. Apparently, this dagger was what Luke was always looking for, and 3PO explains that the location of the Wayfinder has been inscribed on the dagger's surface. This dagger and the writing on it will now drive the plot. Why? Writing on a dagger? We have notepads for that. Why would you put the location of the Wayfinder in text form on a dagger? Why would a Sith-trained assassin use a weapon that has instructions on how to find their secret world etched into its surface? That's so bloody silly. This universe has all sorts of ways of storing information. Books, maps, holodevice, computers, droids, and many other storage devices, yet you inscribe the words on a dagger. The double whammy of which being that using this dagger will cause wear and tear, especially with how poorly designed it is, and thus the inscription will slowly fade unless you touch up the writing on it. It doesn't matter who wrote on this dagger, they were quite beyond silly. So this knife, dagger, whatever, was the clue Luke was always looking for, yet he never thought to check the quicksand pit in case Ochi had fallen in or discarded the dagger into it. I guess Luke wasn't that enthused in looking for it. He reached Ochi's ship, apparently found nothing and gave up there. The writing on this dagger is written in a Sith language that 3PO can read and understand, but he cannot translate it to our heroes. Apparently, droids are forbidden from speaking the text. He says that he is mechanically incapable.
It's the clue that Master Luke was looking for.
And? Where's the Wayfinder?
I am afraid I cannot tell you. Unfortunately, it is written in the runic language of the Sith.
So what?
My programming forbids me from translating it. I am mechanically incapable of speaking translations from Sith.
He then starts to ramble about how this is a rule made by the Senate when droids were made back in the era of the Republic, but 3PO was built by Anakin, so that just confuses me. Why would this be the case? Why would the Republic Senate even want to do this? It makes no sense. Why would you give a droid an ability that it can't use? Because it's not that he can't read it, which would make more sense, it's that he can read it, he just can't speak it. What a waste of time! Just don't program the droid to know that specific language to begin with. Exactly how incapable is 3PO of translating this anyway? Can he mime it? Can he just not translate the text one for one? Can he point on a map? Or can he just tell everyone where it is roughly without giving a direct location? There seem to be plenty of workarounds for this.
I believe the rule was passed by the Senate of the Old Republic.
This ridiculous situation is then interrupted by an underground serpent that gets the jump on our heroes. Clearly this was done after the reveal of the dagger, so general audiences don't get time to stop and think about what they just heard. That's the secret to JJ's writing. Keep things moving, don't let people have time to consider how flimsy this all is. Unfortunately, when you break down a story point by point like this, it falls apart in quite spectacular fashion. Moving on, the snake itself looks very impressive. This whole environment does. Well done to the set designers, I love this kind of stuff. The care and effort that went into the construction of these environments and the monsters. I can talk about the writing and its myriad of issues, but the design and production is certainly a strong point of this film, of this trilogy. It's both a blessing and a curse because, as great as it is, it can result in fans just loving the superficial. But let's be positive for a moment. The film does look great. Mostly. Rey makes an approach to the snake and it's shown to have some deep wounds across its body. The wounds look rather fresh while Ochi is a skeleton, so I can't imagine the two things coincide, bringing into question just where these wounds came from. But that's not important. What is important is what Rey does next. She gently places a hand on the snake near its wound, and the wounds heal. Through the Force. Okay. This is not particularly new. There have been shows and books that have talked about Force Heal before, so this technically isn't a power they have pulled from nowhere. This is, however, the first time we have seen it in a mainline film to my knowledge, and whenever Force Heal has been brought up before, it's used to heal cuts, burns and bruises. So this is actually on point. Nice job, Rey. Though we are left to assume she read this power in a book. For the time being, this is mostly fine, the ability to heal superficial damage on other life forms. If it was healing large-scale injuries like missing limbs or fatal wounds, that would be another thing, as that would bring a lot of the previous films into question, but as of right now, this power works while not contradicting anything that has came before. If it stays that way, it won't be an issue. Wink, wink. Though, to bring it back around, I am suspending my belief a little too much at this point. This is clearly advanced stuff, and Rey has had a year's worth of training in the Force at best. She's been able to cram this power into her repertoire while also studying the texts and other powerful Force abilities. Interesting point of note, the healing costs Rey nothing despite it being described as moving Force energy from one user to another.
I just transferred a bit of life. Force energy from me to him.
Rey is seemingly not weakened or tired by this interaction, setting a precedent there as well. The serpent never strikes Rey during this, it apparently understood what Rey was attempting to do and just lets it happen, and then slithers away afterwards. I guess he just wanted to kill them because his cuts made him grumpy. As the snake leaves, its tail whips around and breaks apart a wall, giving our heroes a way out of the cave. So it was that easy to leave this whole time. The walls were that thin and easily breakable. I guess Uchi the Sith warrior was just incompetent. Lucky for the heroes, because if he wasn't, there would be no lead. So, after completing the Heal the Animal side quest, Chewie puts the silly dagger in his satchel and everyone leaves the cave. We cut to the Knights of Ren, who are just standing on a rock striking some poses to look cool. That's all they do. Cool they might be, but they seem to be wielding normal steel weapons, axes, maces, polearms and swords. They aren't even the electric vibro weapons Snoke's Praetorians had. They're just standard-looking metal tools. I thought these knights were an elite fighting force to be feared. Their weapons and gear sure don't enforce that. I mean, even this guy had a weapon that could counter lightsabers, but Ren's personal knights don't. What even is that? What's that going to do up against a lightsaber? You know who you are hunting, right? Anyway, our heroes are climbing up the rock formation to Ochi's ship, and Poe and Finn rightly comment on how they can't return to the Falcon. It's likely the First Order have it surrounded by now. Nice to know they're willing to give up the ship so easy. It's funny to think Lando is the reason they have abandoned his pride and joy. He intercepted them and told them to come with him into the Sandcrawler. He drove them out of the festival and thus away from the Falcon. None of the heroes suggested Lando take them directly to the Falcon so they could all get aboard and fly to Ochi's ship, nor did Lando think to do that himself. Once they left Lando, they went for some random speeders for their escape instead of the fastest ship in the galaxy. These are intelligent people. Rey seemed to really care about the Falcon when it returned from the first mission damaged, but seems fine about potentially abandoning it forever. Then again, it's hard to tell what Rey is thinking. She sort of just stops and stares off into the distance. Finn asks what's wrong, but then she just wanders off and the others just let her. Despite them all being aware they need to get out of here right now, time is of the essence. Okay, so they get aboard Ochi's ship. It wasn't locked and Poe flips a switch and the ship works. It just works. Alright, film, you embarrassment. What are the chances of that? What are the chances it can still go airborne, or that it's space-worthy after sitting open to the elements for more than 30 years? What are the chances that it's been unlocked the entire time and no one has taken it? Finn spots Rey out the window wandering into the desert and tells Chewie to go get her. They need to go. Why did you let her wander off if you needed to leave immediately, you clueless prat? Oh, it's so the next scene can happen. But before we get to that, I'm going to do a quick summary of how coincidental this has all been up to this point. In my first video discussing my thoughts on the film, I said that Contrivances were the bedrock of this film's story. I'm now going to go through what I meant. This is going to be fun. Our heroes went to the planet to search for a clue to the Wayfinder they need to locate Palpatine. They didn't know what this clue was going to be, but Leia contacted Lando telling them to find them when they arrive. Why didn't she brief the heroes before they left on who they should look for? As we have been through, if she had done that, our heroes would have skipped the festival entirely, and none of the other contrivances would have happened to lead the First Order here. If Lando and Leia had simply called each other before Rey, Finn, Poe, etc. left for Pasaana, they could have spoke over the hologram. This would have streamlined the mission massively, as our heroes could have gone directly to Ochi's ship on their arrival. We also get no explanation for Lando and his activities. Where has he been during this entire fight with the First Order? We never get to know. He just settled here after his trail on Ochi went cold. He didn't go back to Bespin, to his people. He didn't come to advise the resistance with Leia when the fighting started. He stayed here. For some reason. It's unlucky Rey got a necklace in the first place so Kylo could call and take it to use it as a clue, and it's lucky for him the necklace actually provided any answers at all. It's coincidental Kylo now has the power to call Rey at all, despite establishing last film you basically needed to be as powerful as Snoke, and transferring physical objects is now something you can purposefully do instead of it being a small-scale residual effect. The First Order show up to the planet extremely quickly. It's lucky the heroes managed to take some speeders to escape, and it's lucky the First Order didn't back up their pursuit forces with some air support during the chase. It's both unlucky and lucky the final jet trooper gained brief aimbot to shoot down both speeders, and then lucky that he loses that when shooting at still targets trapped in sand afterwards. It turns out to be lucky our heroes landed in quicksand and that Rey forgot she could use her established powers to get them out, because they wouldn't have found the dagger that pushes the plot along otherwise, and it's coincidental that Ochi actually got trapped down here. It's coincidental that 3PO came on this highly dangerous mission so he could read the language on the dagger that they didn't know they were looking for and then drop some weak reasons for why he is incapable of relaying the information, and that the snake allowed Rey to heal it instead of lashing out like an injured predator would, and then involuntarily provides their means of escape. It's bloody lucky Ochi's ship still works and our heroes have a new means of leaving the planet, but strange all of these clues and details about the dagger, Ochi and the ship were skipped over by Luke and Lando because they were selectively incompetent. And what extreme, unbelievable, ridiculous, marvelous coincidence that both the dagger and the ship that act as clues to find the MacGuffins that lead to Palpatine also double as triggers for Rey's memories because they are intrinsically tied to her past. Who would write this? This is unending levels of idiocy. The entire story has been built on contrivances at this point. One or two in a story can be fine, but this film would not work if contrivances weren't involved in every step so far.
Will this agony ever end?
So, that cavalcade of narrative coinkydink is now past us. We can move on to something else. Something that's more on the funny side. So Chewie leaves the ship to go get Rey, and the camera pans down to show two Knights of Ren watching Chewie leave. It's a back shot and one looks at the other. That's it. Nice to see the Knights of Ren are being utilized so well. Rey is wandering out into the sand. We don't know what's compelling her to come out here, but it's lucky she doesn't get stuck in more of that quicksand that's apparently about. Was this the only patch in the entire area? That just makes falling into it far more lucky. Rey pauses, sensing the approach of a TIE fighter, Kylo's to be exact. She decides to not only not run away, but to not leave in general. She stands still. Remember, this is the same character who rushed to tell the others they had to get out of here the moment Kylo took the necklace, even though she had no idea what he was going to be able to get out of it. She was the reason they left so hastily. Now she's delaying them. For no reason. She already knows Kylo is on the way. This should be more of a reason to speed up escaping. Poe gets the ship's engines working again. The ship just seems fine. Implausible. Finn leaves the ship to go see where Chewie has gone because he has not reached Rey. Finn gets out and finds Chewie has been captured by the First Order, is chained up and is now being walked into a First Order landing transport that was so close to where Ochi's ship is, I wonder why Finn and Poe have not been caught yet. What I'm getting at is the First Order have the forces and the means to capture everyone. They see Ochi's ship, they saw Chewie leave the ship, but they don't investigate it even after Chewie is caught. Chewie also happened to make no sound to warn anyone despite his ability to be rather noisy. He didn't fire his bowcaster in self-defense, he just complies. Chewie also brought the dagger with him instead of leaving it on the ship with the others, because of course. Meanwhile, while this is all happening, Rey is standing in the middle of an open area, draws her lightsaber and just waits for Kylo to get here. Why? As far as Rey is aware as a character, Kylo is coming to capture her, but she's just letting him approach and not stopping to consider her friends currently. She then starts to run. Naturally, Kylo's TIE catches up with her. It's flying very close to the ground. She then does a backflip over the TIE with the Force. It flies under her, and she cuts the wing off with her lightsaber. Yes, this all happens. The TIE fighter loses control and the cockpit breaks off and starts hurtling across the sand dunes, rolling over and over and over again like a bowling ball going down a hill before impacting the ground so hard it explodes. Massive fireball. Kylo survives this because we have more than 2/3 of the movie left to go. Kylo's intentions here are strange. He wants to capture Rey, as he said to her, but from his actions in this scene, he seems very set on killing her, as in using his fighter to run her over. But if he wants her dead, why didn't he simply shoot her? His ship has guns. This whole thing was set up by a character betraying her actions from earlier. It's just a cool visual which devolves into another character surviving something he shouldn't. What was the point of any of this? Could you imagine if Rey just stood there in the desert and Kylo flew around her, goes over to Ochi's ship, captures or kills Poe and Finn while Rey is just standing there, fart-arsing about in the sand? He wanted to talk with her, yes? Bring her over to the dark side. Don't know why, but ignoring that, why didn't he just go straight to where his men had captured Chewbacca? Maybe the others if he had the sense to storm Ochi's ship and take them prisoner? Use them as leverage to get Rey to surrender? Rey waited for Kylo's ship to get very close so she could jump over and chop the fighter's wing off. She chooses to commit to this action, which might be the one that puts her in the most danger. She could have ran towards the ship, slid under and chop at it from underneath. She could have thrown her lightsaber at the ship to take it out from a distance. She could have used the Force to stop it entirely. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Anyway, the ship explodes. Well done, Rey. Finn, who saw Chewie get taken, calls to Rey across the desert that
They got Chewie! They got him!
He yells this, and he's standing out in the open, yet still no Knights of Ren rush over to capture him. In fact, the transports are already taking off. First Order are a smart bunch of people. Rey reaches out with the Force and grabs the ship as it's taking off. Meanwhile, Kylo, of course alive after his very visceral crash and completely unhurt, even his clothing is immaculate, walks out of the wreckage, and so begins a very idiotic scene. Using the Force, Rey attempts to pull the transport back down to the ground, but angles the ship upwards so the thrusters counteract her, which just makes her task more difficult. Kylo then reaches out with the Force and grabs the ship himself, attempting to pull it away from Rey. The two do battle, pulling the ship in their respective directions until Rey eventually gets frustrated and unintentionally, and I'm not joking here, fires lightning out of her hand, which hits the ship, and I'm not joking here, it explodes and crashes, killing everyone on it, including assumedly Chewbacca. And I'm gonna slow this right down. Rey and Finn are in shock at the fact Chewie is now dead. Poe from the ship calls them both back as there are fighters on the way. There are still no guards that spot Poe or the ship that's ready for takeoff. Finn and Rey make their run back to the ship, while Kylo just stands there, doing nothing, not going after them, despite only being several meters away. I'm fine. Excluding everything that built up to this already being flawed as hell, why is this scene terrible, no good, very bad? Well, Kylo's choice to grab the ship with the Force is the worst choice he could have made at this point. He could have force-attacked Rey, pushed her, or force-grabbed her, which would have interrupted her attempt to pull the ship back down, that way it could get away. He could have simply walked up to Rey and ignited his lightsaber and attacked, forcing her to engage him to protect herself, and again letting the ship go. Finn, on the other hand, watches this all transpire. He doesn't think to pull out a blaster to shoot Kylo while Kylo is open and focusing his efforts on pulling the ship away from Rey. Rey has one on her person. Take the blaster off Rey's belt, shoot Kylo. That is, of course, if you don't have one yourself, which of course you should. Why would you leave Ochi's ship without protection after you barely survived being chased by the First Order moments ago? As for the First Order carrier itself, it has a gun on it. We see that, yet it doesn't fire upon Rey, the girl that is preventing its escape. It is apparently also made of paper, as the lightning Rey fires as a fluke destroys it, but as we see later on, ships of this size and smaller can survive direct hits from force lightning. The fact that Rey can do this out of nowhere by accident is a full step over the line ridiculous. How do you accidentally manage to do something this powerful when you've never tried to do it before as far as we are aware? I mean, why would you? It's not an ability for the Jedi. But yes, Rey does it out of nowhere and is shocked, as we are. Once the ship explodes, we the audience are left thinking, did they just kill off Chewbacca? Well, I mean, Kylo survived his explosion, Palpatine survived his. Since the film has established explosions don't kill characters, in fact it's barely an inconvenience to them, I'm sure Chewie will be just fine. Do you understand what I'm hinting at here? I'm not going to bother getting invested in characters' lives if they can just walk off stuff like this so casually. Cause and effect are gone. The stakes are gone. Though everyone screams Chewie's name, so maybe he really is dead. What a dreadful death for the character that would be. But we don't get time to think or mourn. The scene keeps going with Rey and Finn escaping Kylo Ren, and Kylo just letting it slide. And then the scene cuts. It cuts away. Movie, you think we're not going to have questions just because you cut the scene short? Rey and Finn got on the ship, we can assume, but how did they escape the First Order? In their next scene, we see they are parked in an asteroid field going over what just happened. But how? Poe pointed to enemy fighters that were on the approach. They would have gotten extremely close before Rey and Finn got onto Ochi's ship and took off. Not to mention, we now know thanks to this scene, the common TIE fighter can now track ships through light speed, so how did they get away? Or is Ochi's ship even faster than the fastest ship in the galaxy? We literally just got done establishing Kylo can grab ships of a decent size with the Force, as can Rey. Did he not try that with Ochi's ship when they made their escape? He wasn't that far away, but he just didn't do it apparently. No one intervened, no Knights of Ren intercepted anyone. I mean, they should have already raided the ship and caught Poe during this nonsense, unless they really are that worthless. The film will support this suggestion. Nor did Kylo chase anyone at all, nor did the TIE fighters catch the ship as it escaped, nor did the fighters or the First Order destroyer that is shown above the planet track their location via hyperspace tracker. Nah, just cut away. Star Wars audiences are stupid. This film has lost its mind. It's surpassing The Last Jedi for frequency of issues right now, though this film is densely packed, so that kind of serves as an explanation. Either way, that's our time on Desert Planet number 4 over and done with, and it's probably the worst bombardment of terrible scenes I've witnessed in a Star Wars film. And good lord, I'm 40 minutes into this film and I've already surpassed 24,000 words. Fortunately from here, things get a little bit better, but it's not a permanent change. The following scene is our heroes mourning on Ochi's ship. Rey blames herself for Chewie's death, which, you know, is right.
I'll be right behind you. It's okay.
She delayed everyone by wandering off for no reason, resulting in Chewie's capture, and then blew up the ship he was on. I didn't feel sympathy for Rey in this moment because she acted completely out of whack for this to happen.
We have to go.
Hi.
It's Ren.
What is it?
I'll be right behind you.
The acting between Rey and Finn is pretty good here, though. Rey talks about a vision she saw of her on the throne of the Sith and is a bit shaken because of it. I don't know why this is a line we are getting just now. This would explain why Rey has been out of sorts, being panicky and spaced out while also having built up frustration. It feels like this should have been something that came at the very beginning of the film. Maybe Rey mentions this vision she had to Leia when she was explaining why she cut training short that day. Don't just tell us it now as an explanation for why Rey has been acting out of character. And while these two characters are sharing things that are currently on their mind, Remember, Finn has something to tell Rey himself, and he said he would share it with her later. This seems like a good time. They literally have nothing else going on, but nope. Guess we will need to wait around a little bit more for that. Gotta keep them mystery boxes, folks. Screen cut to the First Order, who have captured the Falcon. I'm not exactly sure why. I guess they might be able to calculate where the heroes have travelled to recently, and from that they can find the Resistance base, even though this is something they don't do. You know, check the Millennium Falcon's navigational records. They have the means of locating where the Resistance are stationed and could go there right now to wipe them out. And if they did that, the film's over. If they can discern Rey's location from one crappy necklace, surely they can do that.
Under command of the Knights of Ren, we suffered losses.
Hux complains about how they have taken losses under the orders of the Knights of Ren. They lost a transport ship and soldiers. As if that's the worst thing the First Order have lost. As far as I was aware, Starkiller Base was under your command, Hux, and everyone blames you for its destruction, so this is some terrible deflection. Hux also informs General Pride that there was a second transport ship in the desert, and it brought back a valuable prisoner. It brought back Chewbacca. Chewie is alive. They faked his death. He was presumed dead by the audience for 1 minute and 32 seconds. What was the point? Just to mold viewers into an emotional state over the fact that Chewbacca seemed dead, but psych, he's just fine. I'd barely had time to process it before the film reversed this decision. How jarring. It would seem the film didn't have the nerve to let this lie for much longer. Why did they do this? Just for emotional manipulation? Because that was very shallow. Chewie's death doesn't even drive the plot or act as development for our characters aside from one line from Rey in the previous scene.
It wasn't your fault.
It was.
No. It was Ren. He made you do
Chewie's
it.
gone. That power came from me. Finn never thinks you don't know. I had a vision of the throne of the Sith. And who was on it?
Ren.
And me.
Which I already mentioned should have been discussed at the start of the film for more logical sense. The heroes still need to go to their next location regardless of Chewbacca's death. However, the heroes discovering Chewie is still alive does serve as the catalyst for the second act of the film. And it results in some more tismy writing, so thank God they pulled the Chewie death bait and switch. It was really important. As if this film didn't feel cluttered already. Doing a bait and switch is fine, but this is the third time in the first act of the film they have ripped away the consequences of an event that would have caused a character death, which means the stakes are so low at this point they are below the basement. And this scene was seemingly slipped in between Rey, Finn and Poe deciding what to do next, because as soon as they reveal Chewie is alive, they cut back to the three of them debating their next move. You couldn't have placed this scene anywhere else. It's not like the two brief chats on Ochi's ship needed to be broken up. Yes, I am criticizing the film's placement of scenes.
So what are we gonna do? What can we do? We gotta go back to base.
We don't have time to go back. We are not giving up.
Poe shoots down Finn's first suggestion to return to base because that would make too much sense. They have no leads as far as they are aware, but then 3PO comments that while they may have lost the dagger, the inscription on it is saved in his memory.
That was the only clue to the Wayfinder thing and it's gone.
So true. The inscription lives only in my memory now.
He says that there is no way he is able to translate it to the others, which we have already gone over being extremely weak reasoning as there are many forms of indirect communication 3PO could use. The only way for him to give them the translation is through a memory bypass. More information on that later. Poe says he knows a black market droid smith that could perform the procedure and that he's on the planet of Kijimi. Lucky he knows this guy. I'm assuming this isn't something 3PO could be taken back to base to have done by someone like R2. I mean, if the writing allowed it they could, but no. They don't have time to go back to base, but they do have time to go to a completely random planet to get this done. Poe mentions he has some bad history on Kijimi, but they have no other option, which, they might do, we don't know. The film doesn't explore other options ever. But Finn responds to Poe by saying that they are in this together, to the end, while looking at Rey and trying to indirectly console her, as throughout this scene Rey has been clearly withdrawn, still processing recent events that have happened. It's a nice touch of character between these two amongst a bog of low-tier and self-destructive writing. And so they agree to head off to Kijimi, and as they pull away, a First Order ship, also hiding in the asteroids, follow them. This is apparently the Knights of Ren's ship, and it looks as clunky and haphazardly designed as they have been so far. Why they are chasing the heroes now as they leave the system as opposed to before they left Pasaana is anyone's guess. Nor did the Knights of Ren intercept the heroes while they were parked in the asteroid belt, despite being not very far away. To be exact, the camera pans across one asteroid and we see the Knights of Ren ship is just there. Really? Your intention is to capture them, but you don't board the ship and take them by surprise. Is not doing logical decisions just a character trait to a Knight of Ren? Back on the ship, BB-8 finds a small droid that is just sitting in the corner and so reboots it.
Hello.
This droid's name is Dio, and his existence will continue to bring up many issues that will drastically affect the script. There are two right now. Number 1, the droid just starts to tag along with the heroes and none of the others question who this droid is or what it knows immediately. Remember, it was found on Ochi's ship, Ochi being their initial lead to finding the Wayfinder. This droid would likely hold information on Ochi, where he had been to previously, what he had done, what his future plans were, including potentially information on Exegol, or at least how to find the object required to get there, which when you think about it, would make this whole trip to Kijimi pointless. No one thinks to ask the droid anything, or get BB-8 to look into its memory banks. Even Rey, who has been having weird deja vu moments regarding this ship, she believes she recognizes it, and this droid could provide her with information as to why. And number 2 would be that Luke and Lando searched Ochi's ship when they were tailing him. Lando said they found nothing.
When we got to his ship, it was abandoned. No clue, no wayfinder.
No clue, no wayfinder. They just happened to brush over this droid that could very well be the answers to all of this. You are telling me neither of them noticed or had the intelligence to investigate Dio? More support to the idea that Luke and Lando were just incompetent, which is not great reasoning for fan-favourite characters of the original trilogy. But now we are off to Kijimi, and that's it for Act 1 of this film. I hope everyone is still with me. We've had so much to get through, but there remains so much more. Next episode we will be jumping straight into Act 2. I can't wait. For now, that's all from me and this first part of the series. I realise how long this has been and we've had so much to talk about, but hopefully everyone has enjoyed their time thus far. As for a few final things to say, like I mentioned before, my intention with this series is not to kick dirt in the face of Star Wars while it's down. I simply have a keen interest to talk about the quality of film production, be it good or bad. I'm not a hardcore Star Wars fan, but it is a franchise I have a passion for. Therefore, this series really is the marriage of both of those desires. To talk about a series I adore, but also dissect the scripts to see how the modern films tick. This is of course my first time creating a series like this. Experimental is the word I would use. I am exploring avenues for this channel, to see exactly what I am best with. But either way, rest assured creating this series has been extremely cathartic. It's damn hard work, but I love the process. I wouldn't have done this if I didn't. My narrative to this series, as I'm sure you can guess, is to explore why the Rise of Skywalker was disliked by many people, explore all the reasons while focusing closest of all on what the script provides instead of the messages to individuals it may deliver, though I have explored that in many places and I will continue to. After going through this series with me as I analyse the story point by point, it's down to you as the person listening to come to your own conclusion of whether or not you agree with me. However, I haven't solely been pushing the negative. I have taken the time to defend or praise the film for elements I think are genuinely well done. And of course, this series is by no means meant to say that you shouldn't like the film, or you are wrong for being invested in it. When I bring up something like the characters' relationships being weak in terms of establishment, that is objectively provable, since we can look back on all the times on screen they have bonded, and therefore created an opportunity for the audience to bond with them. I, just like anyone else, cannot say objectively how much a person will or will not be invested into that relationship. But we can count all the flaws in the script that might hinder that experience for some people. I fall into that bracket. The flaws in the story and the lack of time we've had characters bonding on screen has affected my investment negatively, but people can remain unaffected because we all experience stuff differently. However, like I said in the beginning, you not being bothered by the flaws does not make them not flaws. Ultimately, the Rise of Skywalker bothered or disappointed a great deal of people. I don't think anyone would deny that, and a large portion of those people would probably like validation of why in terms of assessment of it, which is what I'm hoping to provide, with my own spin on things. So join me next time. I hate to sound like one of those people, but screw it. To you wonderful folks out there, sharing my content would be tremendously appreciated, and I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments section below of what you think of all this. Take care, dear listeners, and stay tuned for next time.